Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1999 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Hilary Swank won for her performance in Boys Don't Cry. But why did she beat fellow nominees Annette Bening, Janet McTeer, Julianne Moore, and Meryl Streep? We'll explore all this and more today on the season finale of And the Runner-Up Is. Hello, and welcome back to the season finale of And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk the 72nd year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1999. We'll be discussing how Hilary Swank won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today is returning to the show for the first time in like a year and a half, almost 2 years now. You last heard her talking with me about the Best Actress lineup of 1956. She is the host of a very cool new podcast, Female Gaze, the Film Club, which discusses films that are directed by women. So thrilled to welcome back to the show, Morgan Roberts.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, very excited to break down the end of the 20th century.
Yeah.
Like, it's a big deal.
Absolutely. It's a very interesting lineup, too. So I'm excited to dive into these different performances.
Doing very different things, for sure.
Absolutely.
Lots of different tones, lots of different styles, yeah. But before we talk 99, let's talk Best Actress as a category. So last time I asked you your favorite Best Actress win of all time, and you said Judy Holliday in Born Yesterday. Such a great pick. So now I'll ask you as an alternative, do you have a favorite Best Actress lineup of all time?
Yeah, so this was difficult because I feel like there are so many years where it's like maybe 4 out of the 5. I'm like, oh, I love this group. Kind of, I was looking back at like 2005. And of course, that's also the year that Felicity Huffman was in there for Transamerica. And you're like, ew. Everyone else is great, and this sticks out like a sore thumb.
Sure.
So I'm just going to go, maybe because it's recent, but I'll just kind of go with what I feel is a safe answer, which is the 2020, which was like 2020, 2021 lineup, which had, Viola Davis, Vanessa Kirby, Frances McDormand, Carey Mulligan, and of course, Andra Day as Billie Holiday, which maybe not my favorite film, but an incredible performance. And I feel that all of them really brought such they just were operating at a high caliber, and every performance, regardless of how I felt about the films, were really powerful. So I'm just going to go with that one.
That's a really, really good pick. And that is one that I am super duper excited to cover down the line because of all the chaos leading up to that Oscars, because as we remember, everyone kind of won a precursor except for poor Vanessa Kirby, who kind of had to be like the odd one out there. But
I mean, and everyone was super cool on the internet about it. No one freaked out for 8 months. Everyone was totally normal. I say extremely facetiously.
Here's how Carey Mulligan could still win.
Yes.
But yeah, really, really good lineup overall. Really excited to break that one down. But my other question for you, you said that your most heartbreaking loss of all time in this category was the great Jill Clayburgh for An Unmarried Woman, which is definitely one of mine as well. So as an alternative, what would you say is your most heartbreaking snub overall in this category?
Yeah, so I have 2, I'm cheating, and neither actress was likely really in the conversation, but I think if the Academy was brave, both of these women would have been nominated and hopefully won. So the first is 2004, Rachel McAdams as Regina George in Mean Girls.
Wow.
I just feel like that's such an iconic performance. It's a really difficult performance, really layered for a teen comedy. And I just think she's fantastic in it. And sorry to Hilary Swank, but should have won. And then my other one,
It's interesting that it's interesting you could classify her as a lead, because some people say she's supporting because it's Katie's story technically, but I kind of do agree that like
yeah,
they're kind of co-leading. So
I
just wanted to note that.
I appreciate that because I also do feel like, 91, I guess, is kind of like the last time that we really recognize that more than one woman can be the lead in a story.
What
Um,
a concept.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so definitely we should bring that back. And
Yeah.
Rachel McAdams should have been able to do that.
Mhm.
And then the other one is 2016's Rebecca Hall as Christine Chubbuck in Christine.
Yes.
Yeah, I know that everyone loved Amy Adams and they wanted her to be nominated, but I feel like Rebecca Hall has been doing really incredible work for a really long time. And what she did with Christine was really revolutionary, really human, and really should have garnered some interest and obviously a nomination for that performance.
Yeah. That is a very difficult watch.
It is.
So I don't blame Academy members maybe for not even checking it out, which they should have, but
Mhm.
it's just a really hard watch. But her performance is something that I've never forgotten in
Yeah,
that movie,
yeah.
especially the ending. So great pick. Yeah,
Thank you.
2016, really, really tough. Yeah, like you said, Amy Adams. Of course, there's Annette Bening, who we'll be talking
Mhm.
about today for 20th Century Women. We've talked about Sandra Hüller for Tony Erdmann on A Woman Robbed. Me and Chelsea talked about that as well. So, yeah, that's just a murderer's row of great lead actress performances
Yeah,
that year.
absolutely.
So, well, let's talk about this year at the Oscars. The 72nd Academy Awards nominees in Best Actress were Annette Bening in American Beauty, Janet McTeer in Tumbleweeds, Julianne Moore in The End of the Affair, Meryl Streep in Music of the Heart, and Hilary Swank in Boys Don't Cry, with the winner being Hilary Swank. So, before we break down these performances, Morgan, would love to know your overall thoughts on this end of the century lineup we have here.
It is a wild end, I will say.
Yes.
There's a lot of range, both in performance and in film. I do love the fact that we have multiple films that are independent films and their lead performances getting
Mhm.
nominations. One of the things that I always loved about the Academy Awards was finding tiny films. Like, I know Jennifer Lawrence's nomination for Winter's Bone kind of put her on my radar. Elliot Page, when he was nominated for Juno, those types of performances were really special. And so to see the fact that we have multiple films here that are independent and the actresses in those films getting this type of recognition was so neat. But yeah, there's also a Lifetime movie somehow snuck in here. We have a period drama. It's a wild bunch for sure.
Yeah, hard to pin down exactly what the vibe is in 1999.
Yeah.
A lot of different types of styles here. Yeah, I mean, first of all, can't believe this is the end of the 90s already. Another season feels like it kind of flew by for me. And to be at the end of, again, a century, I think it's a big deal. Millennium is approaching. And
Mhm.
it really kind of struck me just like right before we signed on here, just how many years I've covered and sort of seen such a big change in film and Oscars and how voters respond to certain performances. So, yeah, and this is, I will say, I think this is going to be a fun one to end the decade with, because
Yeah.
this is just one of those, all-timer kind of matchups. When people look back on this category, it's always been about like this dynamic of Hilary Swank versus Annette Bening, one being sort of the scrappy indie underdog who comes out of nowhere and delivers this totally unique performance in this independent movie. And then, you compare that with the other being in what would be the Best Picture winner of the
Mhm.
year, nearly winning the top 5 Oscars in a relatively like minor to major bigger studio film.
Yeah.
So gonna be fun to figure out how that kind of settled in the end. And then we have the 3 other contenders here who, contrary to how this race is again often talked about, all 3 of them being some of the best actresses working today: Janet McTeer, Julianne Moore, Meryl Streep. And
Yeah.
maybe they weren't quite on the competitive level in this sort of Oscar game of Hillary and Annette, but I'm very intrigued to hear kind of what we have to say about those
Yeah.
and if they're maybe worthy of being in the same category as that top two. So if you don't have anything else, we could get right into it.
Yeah, let's dive in.
Okay, well, we are starting with a pretty big one here. We're starting with Annette Bening in American Beauty. Alrighty, so this is the start of a great off and on run of Best Actress nominations for Annette Bening. Of course, previously getting her first nomination in supporting for The Grifters, a movie we talked about in the premiere of this season. So nice little bookend here for Annette, who has now graduated into taking on a lot more leading roles through the 90s, but to kind of introduce her on the main show here, I already introduced her on A Woman Robbed, but for the main show here, Annette Bening was born in Kansas. She acted in plays starting in junior high and graduated with a degree in theater arts. She started out as a theater actress and became a member of the American Conservatory Theater and did a lot of plays through 87 when she was on Broadway in Coastal Disturbances, which got her first Tony nomination. She made her film debut a year later in The Great Outdoors. She was also in Valmont, which was kind of overshadowed by Dangerous Liaisons, but then The Grifters was her breakout role, again getting that Oscar nomination in supporting. Then the very next year she's co-leading Bugsy with Warren Beatty, who she then marries, and they've been together ever since. She is working with a lot of great leading men through the 90s, Regarding Henry with Harrison Ford, Love Affair again with Warren Beatty, The American President with Michael Douglas. She's in Mars Attack, she's in The Siege. Lots of prolific work there, building up her reputation and becoming just very well liked until American Beauty at the end of the decade, which she's combining that comedic talent she has with her dramatic skills in a film that is ultimately winning Best Picture. So Annette was among a few choices for the role of Carolyn here. At least when the studio got involved, they were like, we don't know if we want Annette Bening. Sam Mendes, the director, did want Annette Bening and Kevin Spacey, but the studio was like, actually, maybe we should do like a Holly Hunter or Helen Hunt, maybe. But Sam Mendes ultimately did get his way. But American Beauty, a suburban drama about an average middle-class white family, the Burnhams. Kevin Spacey is Lester, who's going through a midlife crisis and questioning his worth. His wife, Carolyn, Annette Bening, is a very driven real estate agent who likes everything to be picture perfect, even while things at home are not. And then they have a daughter, Jane, played by Thora Birch, who doesn't seem to like her parents very much, especially when her father takes a very creepy liking to her friend, Angela, who is a high schooler. But for Carolyn, she's kind of unsatisfied with her life, and she goes on to have an affair with this local real estate king in her area, played by Peter Gallagher. But of course, the affair eventually does come out. So let's get into it here, Morgan. Annette Bening, thoughts on her career overall and her very, very, very committed performance here in American Beauty.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned Mars Attacks because that was my introduction to Annette Bening. And
wow.
At an inappropriately young age, of course. And to kind of watch her kind of bounce back and forth between sometimes almost character-ish roles, like as a character actor would, to then having these leading performances. I mean, we've mentioned 20th Century Women. I think it's a perfect film. She's incredible in it. So I just find that her interest in kind of bouncing around and trying almost anything out is really admirable and also makes for a very interesting filmography to dive into. And then, I watched American Beauty in college, and this was also a little bit of a shift from what I had seen her in previously.
Yeah. Well, what do we think of American Beauty overall? Now you're watching it again all these years later, and Annette's performance.
Yeah, I think it's not a film that has aged well, at least for me. I found it to be very two-note, knowing what Annette Bening can do. Again, having both work prior to this performance and after this performance in mind. In rewatching this, it felt like she was kind of given the same two tasks over and over and over again. And while she rose to the occasion, it wasn't as dynamic as like watching this at 20 years old felt. Like as a adult in their early 30s, it was just like, okay, she's unhappy and she's unhappy again. And here we are, and she's unhappy. And while again, I think that she's really a fantastic actress, I just don't know how this material really served her caliber of her craft.
Mm, interesting.
I know, coming in
Yeah.
hot already with a chaotic
I love
take.
it. This will be fun. Yeah. I love Annette Bening. You know, I've talked about it many times. I love her forcefulness as an actress. Her comedic timing, I think, is fantastic. I think she also has that incredible warmth that comes
Mhm.
through, especially in things like 20th Century Women. She's just so versatile, I think. But I love her commitment to playing characters who aren't always easy to love. And I do think she really finds a way to humanize them in a way without it feeling like she's just going for like a easy sympathy, you know, without
Mhm.
betraying the personality of the characters. And I think this performance for me is kind of a miracle. You know, I'm going to come out and say that I'm not a full American Beauty defender necessarily, but I maybe don't mind it as much as other people do nowadays, including yourself. I know a lot of that has to do with Kevin Spacey and then the Lester arc with, you know,
Mhm.
wanting to have sex with this underage girl. Like, I've seen criticism that it's pretentious and, to your point, kind of one note, and that it only scratches the surface, really, of like what it's trying to sort of talk about. You know, I definitely get all that. I don't think it's as insightful and eye-opening as I found it to be when I was growing up either. So it's interesting. You know, I think there are parts of it that do still hold up for me. I think the cast is pretty good all around, even when they're doing wildly different things, a lot of different tones here. But the thing that I kind of respond to most is the social satire element of it, which
Mhm.
maybe felt more revolutionary then than it does now. But that's why, for me, Annette Bening is easily the MVP of the cast and is delivering such a heightened performance that I just enjoy watching. Like, she knows the assignment. Like, she
Mhm.
knows what's being asked of her, and she is just going for broke. Like,
Yeah.
she is showing how she is ambitious, but also sarcastic and smug, and like embodying that classic suburban workaholic mother. But then, with, of course, the whole concept of this film being about looking closer and like seeing what's beneath the surface, there is that hollowness there and a confusion almost of feeling like, I've done everything right. I have the husband, I have the kid, I have the white picket fence. And like, even though we get some much more nuance with Lester in the script than with Carolyn, I do think she does have the harder task. And that is why it is more of a impressive performance than his for me, just setting aside all of his
Right.
baggage.
Yeah. I mean, like, the thing about Lester is he's our protagonist. He doesn't have to be
Yeah.
likable. And that's easy for men in film to do because we give men the grace to just be, assholes the whole time.
Hmm.
And Annette Bening's character is also not likable. She has these unattainable dreams and
Mm.
these really high expectations and is just completely oblivious to like humans and people around her. And that is the much more difficult task for a woman on screen to be able to portray and do it without trying to make her likable. Because I think that the tendency, knowing the way in which people respond to unlikable women, it is to be like, please, no, thank you. Like, I know that everyone loves Rosamund Pike and Gone Girl, and you will talk about her.
Hmm.
And would there actually be a world in which an academy would vote for that? Absolutely not, because they don't like unlikable women. And I think Annette Bening doesn't shy away from her being unlikable, which is kind of the admirable piece of her
Yeah.
performance that does shine through. But I think that the film itself does a great disservice to her regularly. I'm just thinking about there's this part where she and Lester are arguing about this sofa, right? And he's like, it's
Yeah.
just a couch. And she's like, it was a $4,000 sofa. There's Italian silk. Like, she's very particular about this piece of furniture. And Mendes immediately cuts away from her to show Lester. And I get that he's kind of our
Hmm.
protagonist, but again, we can have more than one lead in a film. And I think that her reaction to his disappointment was something I was more interested in than his continued reaction to just being disgusted by frivolity. And so that's why I
Right.
think sometimes this film does not help her, because it doesn't allow her that room to really show those layers.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point, and I think that's something that people don't talk about enough when it comes to like great like best actress types of performances, is that it can't just exist in a vacuum,
Mhm.
you know. It's existing within the story itself and the way that it's edited and filmed, the director trusting the actress to deliver on emotions that are unexpected.
Mhm.
And I do kind of agree that maybe for as great as Sam Mendes' direction can be in parts of the film, that when it comes to her, it does feel like dropping the ball a bit and making her into that just two-dimensional antagonist
Yeah.
more often than not. But to its credit, I do think we do still get some good, windows into her. Obviously, we can talk about the montage of "I will sell this house today,"
Yes.
which is iconic. I think that's probably the most remembered from her performance when
Mhm.
people look back on it. I think just the way that she has this perfect sort of real estate agent smile and her just intense focus there when she's cleaning the house and just like trying to sell at this very ingratiating tone as she talks to these buyers. I think that is very very true to life, even if it is a little bit sort of over the top sitcom-y stuff. But that when she isn't ultimately successful in selling this house today, she just shuts the blinds and just collapses to the floor in tears. It's just like this one moment to herself that she doesn't allow anyone to see. But then even that she tries to paper over in a way, and like nobody's even watching. Like she can just have this moment, and yet she is criticizing herself and being like, slapping herself and calling herself a baby. I think those are very revealing moments where she is able to expand.
Yeah, and she kind of has a moment similar to that later on in the film when her paramour breaks off the affair and she is
Yes.
alone in the car. I find it so interesting that the only time we like to give her space is when she's alone, that she can't have space when men are around.
Hmm.
And, this is a 25-year-old film. So the bar is the floor when it comes to giving a little bit more space and nuance in
Yeah.
films at the time. But she has this moment alone in her car where she is basically listening to this man telling her like manifest destiny type BS on a cassette tape. And she is just repeating it. And the roller coaster of emotions that she's expressing is so powerful because you do get like she's desperate and she's heartbroken. And is she really heartbroken because this affair has ended, or is she heartbroken because her ticket out of what she thinks is this horrible life has left? Is it a combination of that? Is there something else outside of these things that we're not quite understanding? Because even in her moments of quiet, in these moments by herself, she doesn't share them out loud very frequently. There's this whole world inside of her that we're not privy to. And that moment, I think, really kind of encapsulates and is the profound expertise of Benning, because she does allow you to just ride that roller coaster, and it's almost kind of like riding a roller coaster completely in the dark. Like you don't know where you're going. You don't know
Yeah.
what everything that's happening around you, but you're feeling that ebb and flow. So I think, yeah, her kind of sitcom-y, really almost like bordering cheesy comedic, I'm going to sell this house today, and then kind of almost book ending it with her having her meltdown in the car are kind of like the big highlights in her performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I also think that other bookend comes after she is completely humiliated at this fast food drive through because now Lester is working there and she, I guess, doesn't know that. I guess he's not communicating well with her, or she's not listening to him. It's a two-way street. I don't know. But when Lester is there and she's in the car with Buddy, and he's all over her basically. So there's not exactly this isn't a full business meeting necessarily. Just the look on her face it's kind of emphasizing her humiliation ultimately, and it feels
Yeah.
like we are continuing to rag on Carolyn over and over again up to that point, I think. And to be fair, sure, she is cheating.
Yeah.
It's not like she is totally out of the woods there, but it is to follow that up, I think, is important for her to have that moment where he is just like, you know what, this is going to be an expensive divorce. I'm not getting involved. And yeah, her just processing that, I think, is really powerful, because I think it is this one bit of like, oh, this like one bit of unexpected happiness
Mhm.
in her life that is just crumbling before her eyes, and she knows that she can't salvage it. So I think in that moment you do really feel for her,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. And it is kind of almost part of me is like, does she see herself a bit as a martyr? Because he immediately is like, my divorce is going to be expensive. And she's like, absolutely. I totally understand that.
Hmm.
I'm support ending this. And it's like, she was so quick to just make him happy
Yeah.
that it kind of, I feel like that says so much, but there's not enough development to kind of really anchor that. But it is like a glimpse at, oh, here's this woman who is deeply unsatisfied, but also is willing to sacrifice her own happiness over and over and over again for the men in her life.
Yeah.
And I feel like if we had given a little bit more time and attention to that, that could have really just elevated and given Annette just more to do with the character.
Yeah. That's where, when I was watching this again, I'm like, I wish this was more from her
Hmm.
perspective than it is. Maybe that's just Desperate Housewives.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen Desperate Housewives, but
Oh,
like the
yeah.
whole Brie and Rex stuff in the beginning is very American Beauty coded.
Yes.
Just saying.
Yes. I mean, the whole series feels very American Beauty coded, at least in that first
Yeah.
season, and just
Hmm.
the structure of the series. And um
Yeah.
yeah, I think one of the things though that this does also highlight is that like working moms are actually very interesting characters. And again, while I don't think that she has the room that I think nowadays we might feel more comfortable giving women who are working suburban mothers that space, it was at least nice to see even just a glimpse of that kind of that window saying like, yeah, there is so much more to soccer moms than we're giving them credit for. And
Yeah.
again, underdeveloped, but at least I liked that we were seeing that at that period of time.
Yeah. And speaking to another just brief glimpse into Carolyn that I wanted to mention, which I actually forgot about on before this rewatch, is when she is talking with Jane at one point, and she has this sort of heart to heart talk and saying, you cannot count on anyone except yourself.
Yeah.
The sooner you learn that, the better. And she slaps Jane because Jane's like, I don't want a Kodak moment here, and is being like very sarcastic teenager. And then that's when Carolyn goes into this story about how when she was growing up, she didn't even have her own house. She had like a duplex or something.
Mhm.
But I do appreciate that we get a scene like that where we can see where maybe some of that drive for that perfectionism
Yeah.
is coming from. Is that like, I don't want to repeat the same thing that I dealt with growing up, and I want better for Jane, and I want better for me ultimately.
Mhm.
So, I like that scene at least. There's also the Don't Rain on My Parade scene where she's singing in the car, which I also
Yes.
enjoy
Yeah.
just from a comedic standpoint, after she's got a gun and she's like shooting it at the range and just like is almost turned on by this, the power that it gives her. And then, yeah, totally feeling herself belting it out in the car. I think that's just, it's
Yeah.
fun.
And she was able to hold a tune really well.
Yeah.
Because my dad is a musician, and so we sometimes are a little bit critical when we're hearing people just like singing in a car. And as Annette was singing, I was like, man, she's like really hitting those notes. I
Yeah.
love this for her. It was a good for her moment because I'm just like, yeah,
Yes.
have the power of a firearm and the power of Barbara Streisand to take you home.
That's all you need sometimes.
Sometimes.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think in a somewhat, for me, flawed film and flawed perspective at times, I do think she does. Personally, I think she emerges beyond what's asked of her and goes above and beyond. So I'm happy with this nomination, despite some of the flaws we discussed.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel
Yeah.
like there are worse films even in this lineup. Yeah.
Sure.
Again, it's also Annette Bening, and she can take probably reading the phone book and make it interesting.
Yep. Okay, let's move on to our next nominee here, Janet McTeer in Tumbleweeds. So, Janet McTeer is getting her first and only Best Actress nomination here, but she will get another Oscar nomination down the road for Albert Nobbs in Supporting Actress. So, Janet McTeer, British actress, born in England. She trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and she got into theater and got some Olivier Award nominations. She did TV work in Britain. Her film debut was in Half Moon Street in 1986, but she had somewhat prominent roles in the 90s, like in Wuthering Heights and Carrington. She was the narrator of Velvet Goldmine. And meanwhile, in the late 90s, she's also in a production of A Doll's House on the stage, for which she gets a lot of acclaim, and she wins the Tony Award in 1997. So, as A Doll's House is happening for her, she is interviewed on Charlie Rose, where Gavin O'Connor, the director of what will become Tumbleweeds, sees her and is dead set on casting her in the lead role. Producers didn't really want to finance the film because she was considered too unknown, at least in America. So it ended up being an ultimately independent production that he financed himself. And here she is getting this Oscar nomination. So Tumbleweeds, it's about a single mother, Mary Jo, played by Janet McTeer, who's from Tennessee. And she keeps moving from place to place with her daughter, Ava, played by Kimberly J. Brown. As Mary Jo is dealing with bad relationships, she is just fleeing over and over every time it gets bad. Eventually, they land in San Diego to start their life over again, and Ava really takes to her new life, and she's acting in the school play. Meanwhile, Mary Jo gets into another relationship that seems kind of ill-fated and is thinking about uprooting again, but then Ava finally puts her foot down. So let's talk Janet McTeer here. Thoughts on Janet, her career, whether you have a relationship with her as an actress, and her performance here in Tumbleweeds.
Yeah, I feel like Janet McTeer just randomly shows up in things and you're like, oh, she's in
She
this.
sure does.
I love this.
It's like, oh,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Like, she's kind of like that steady Eddie. If she shows up, regardless if she's in it for the entire time or 10 minutes, she's going to be really just like spot on, give such a nuanced performance. I mean, my favorite performance from her is from the series Sorry for Your Loss, where she plays Elizabeth Olsen's mom after Olsen's husband passes away. And like, it's funny watching this film because this was the first time I watched it. She really has such a great maternal presence. I mean, she was also in Me Before You, I believe, playing Sam Claflin's mom. And yeah, she just kind of has like, I feel like if you were in trouble, she would have a Band-Aid available, have like Tylenol available. She just kind of has like this warmth and just steadiness that I feel can really elevate a performance, which then again with this performance, I felt was completely kind of against type for her, which I was delighted to see. But yeah, just love her showing up in things all the time.
Yeah, for sure. I really enjoy Janet McTeer. I love whenever she, like you said, whenever she pops up and stuff nowadays. I thought she was one of the highlights of The Menu from a few years ago.
Yep.
Enjoyed her on Ozark. She definitely has a commanding presence, and she always feels very just immersed in her characters, which I love to see. I think her nomination for Albert Nobbs is good. Say what you want about that film. She definitely provides kind of like a memorable presence more often than not. And I do think that with Tumbleweeds, this is kind of a rare opportunity to see her in a proper leading role,
Yeah.
which I feel like we very rarely see at all. I know she's been the lead of like theater stuff, but in terms of film, there just wasn't a whole lot but beyond this, besides Songcatcher, which was the next year, that really had her in these kind of leading roles. I don't know if that's Hollywood not knowing what to do with her, or if it was her choice, or somewhere in between. But yeah, I thought she was fantastic in this, and I was a little nervous going into it, admittedly, because I knew Janet McTeer, British. I know she's played Americans before, but I hadn't really seen her do anything quite like this. And I'm always a little antsy about like Brits playing Southern kind of thing,
Yeah.
because it can feel a little phony at times, I think. But Janet, I think, is kind of a natural, right?
Yeah. Yeah. She kind of reminded me a bit of like Vivian Leigh doing a Southern woman, because it's like,
Sure. Yeah.
both of them are theater actors, and then they come into film and they do take these Southern, here she is in this role playing a woman from the South. And I think she just is such a wonderful presence on screen. Like, she is very commanding, but there is like her and Kimberly J. Brown. Oh my gosh, Marnie Piper coming in. Their chemistry is so great. And I feel like there sometimes is a tendency when there are child actors to treat those moments with children a little bit like we're playing underhand softball, or baseball there. Like, we're just kind of playing it safe. And I feel like Janet McTeer was like, we're playing the game, we're doing the thing. And I think they both elicit really great performances out of each other. Admittedly, I was super excited to see this because this was like on paper a Morgan movie. It's a Sundance film.
Yep.
It's a mother-daughter relationship movie. It is in Southern California, which I love. So there were a lot of things that I was super excited to see, and watching Janet McTeer play this woman who is kind of a mess, who feels as if running away is the best way to stay safe. I think that's really hard to be able to have a performance that feels interesting when you're coming into a very known pattern. And I think that she really does an incredible job with it.
Yeah, I find her really natural. I was kind of surprised just even from the first few scenes, just how much I felt like, oh, I didn't have to worry. Like, I'm in good hands here. There is just such an easygoing charm, I think, that never feels like it's too much or that she's hamming it up, despite playing a very extroverted type of person.
Yeah.
I think, like you said, her chemistry with Kimberly J. Brown of Halloween Town fame is very natural. And that's another thing where I was like, are these two going to be a good fit for each other? Because like I know them very separately as actresses before this, but I wasn't sure like how this was going to work. But yeah, they work really well together. I love their sort of shared language, and their sort of nonverbal communication they have, I think, is so specific. And definitely like a proto Gilmore Girls vibe going on there, where like the mother is oversharing kind of, and the daughter is kind of precocious. So I think even though this is maybe a familiar type of dynamic, that they do find some originality within that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like one of the things that I love so much about this performance, because I also watched Anywhere But Here, another 1999 film with very similar plot points, with Susan Sarandon and Natalie Portman playing the mother-daughter roles. I found that Janet McTeer did such an incredible job when she needed to be very quiet and grounded, and making those shifts so effortlessly. Like, I'm thinking there's this part where her daughter is getting ready to go to the movies on her first date with a boy, and she is, she's excited for her. They're talking about things. They're getting ready. And the minute that Kimberly J. Brown walks out of that room, she just like has this moment to herself where she is like both happy and just so heartbroken watching her daughter grow up. Like, there is just such a tenderness in that moment that the shift from having this very loud, boisterous, we're super excited, we're gonna go to a movie, it's gonna be great, to, oh my gosh, my kid is not a tiny child anymore. Like, they have this life outside of me now, and I'm getting a glimpse at that. And it was just such a powerful shift. And I don't think that every actor would be able to do that so well.
Yeah. She has so many beautiful little moments in the film. I even picked up on one that's like very small in the grand scheme of things, but her just in bed with her daughter and just whispering to her at some point about how they deserve a little happiness.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just those quiet little moments. I think, like I said, the dynamic does have that familiarity there, but when Mary Jo is talking about like all the men that she's been with and the guy she rejected at one point who looked like an elf, like there's such a specificity there. And I do just love this sort of understanding that I think Kimberly J. Brown really delivers.
Yeah,
Kind of an equally great performance, honestly, if I do
absolutely.
say so. But just between them, those little looks of like recognizing patterns in her mother and being so used to this routine at this point that they have of constantly uprooting and her never feeling like she has a place for like home and safety. Those moments, I think, just make Janet's performance at the same time all the more striking, just in how they're able to, you understand it from both angles, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like kind of in the way that Bening is playing an unlikable character, Janet McTeer's performance kind of has to teeter that line between
Yeah.
I am this super likable, please root for me, single parent who's just trying her best, and I am just absolutely making a mess of everything and not thinking the consequences through. And she has to ride that line so impeccably, because I feel like if you teeter one way or the other too much, you do a disservice to either side. You know, like just watching her, she like quits her job, and it's both like, yes, tell your creepy boss that you're not going to do that, but also you literally have no backup plan and you're relying on just a skeezy dude to take care of you, to then her going to a nursery with the great Lois Smith, by the way. Loved some of these
Yeah.
cameos. And just basically like begging of going like, I'm not too proud to say that I need help, but I'm also not too timid to tell you, here are where my strengths are, and I will happily give them to you.
Yeah.
And I just, again, I feel like in lesser hands, some of this might have been played too big. Some of it might have undermined the more quiet moments or the more vulnerable moments. And she just really rides that line just so well to give such a beautiful performance here.
Yeah, it's much trickier, I think, than it looks, especially, again, not to keep harping on it, but like playing a Southern woman as a
Yeah.
refined British person, Janet McTeer is. It's, you know, on top of that, all those layers you talked about is all the more impressive to me, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think she has a lot of great comedic moments too, because this is a comedy ultimately.
Yeah.
Just before she's quit and when she's bonding with this woman at her work and talking about like coffee enemas or something and how great they are, and Janet's reaction being like, well, good lord.
Yep.
It's just so funny. And them going out dancing, and then like at least by that point in the film you're kind of like, okay, she seems like a fun hang and like this bright light who like is always attracting attention and is so charismatic. But the other side of that is like how that impulsive sort of fun time gal personality does have consequences when it comes to her daughter's well-being, and how her overt sort of openness to everything and her impulsiveness isn't always in her best interest. And that's, of course, with the whole relationship with this guy, Jack, who she meets on the road at one point, and then they coincidentally meet up again in San Diego. And you just know, I don't know about you, you just know that it's bad news. Like,
Yeah.
this is not going to end well.
Yeah. I mean, considering her pattern, you're just like, if she's not meeting someone in like someone else is setting her up, if there is not a control person kind of puppeteering a meet cute, you know that the
Yeah.
men that she's attracted to are just bad news from the get-go. It kind of almost is like, oh, here we go again, like this self-fulfilling prophecy that, you know, her daughter is kind of talking about and alluding to in so much of her early dialogue. And by the time that it happens, you're just like, I think the other thing too is Janet McTeer does such a great job of actually making you want to root for this woman, not in spite of her flaws, but like accepting that she's a flawed human. And by the time that she meets, Jack, you're just like, oh, I just wanted this to be different for you. Again, powerful performance to be able to make you feel as if she is able to divert from her usual self, and then having her re-enter that pattern and feel just as devastated, I think is really impressive.
Right, exactly. It's like, I know that I've had trouble with all these guys in the past, and I know what Ava is saying about how this is going to be more of the same, but also there's a part of me that's like, I know in my heart that I like this guy, and ultimately I'm the mother here, I know best, and that's just kind of the end of it. It's like when your friend is in those sort of not so great relationships over and over again, that and then they're like, oh well, this one's different, when all the signs are like, no, it's sweetie, no.
Yeah, they're like, the flags are pink, and you're like, they're red. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it's really a great performance, very, very nuanced. I do just want to also point out the horribly awkward dinner scene where they go out to eat at one point later on in the film, and he's really become just a full-on asshole by this point, and it just escalates and escalates, and just her discomfort as she's sitting next to him and realizing what's happening is so palpable, and realizing like, oh yeah, this is, my daughter was right, that like this is just another one of those guys.
Yeah.
It's really tough. Yeah.
It's also because like she is now seeing her child as like a more autonomous person. And I think having that dinner scene kind of after those moments of her having those realizations of like, my kid is still my kid, but she has her individual thoughts. She has this individual life. And to kind of be confronted in the moment with her saying like, stop telling me what to do. You're not my parent, and Jack being extremely controlling. I think it was such a heartbreaking aha moment that, could you imagine just being a patron in that restaurant and having that happen two tables away from you?
God, I mean, I could just feel the tension just watching it from a safe distance.
Absolutely.
Ugh. Yeah, really, really well done scene. But yeah, after that point, she is obviously just going to end it with him. And she's like, oh, you know what? Okay, this is my time to flee. This is the step in the process where, goodbye, San Diego. I'm going somewhere else now. And of course, that is where Ava's like, no, I am having fun. Like, I'm acting in the school play, and I'm going to play Romeo and like making friends and everything. And with Mary Jo, it's just like, she doesn't quite understand why her daughter is finally putting her foot down, and is scared because now Ava's run away, of course. And that's when her old coworker comes around, and I think that's one of Janet's best scenes in the whole film, is when she's made it clear that like there's no reason for her to go, that she won't just be bumping into him, which is like that was her main concern, is running into him again. And like what she does as she's looking out the window, and she's just starting to like well up with emotion there, and her coworker is like, why Arizona? And that's because that's where she wants to go, and she just sort of like gasps out like, I had an old boyfriend there. I think that's really, really well done. It's like all this pain that she's been trying to tamp down is now finally reaching this breaking point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and having kind of these voices of reason that she really trusts, I think is also really powerful, because again, you can see warning signs, but being able to kind of challenge someone in a way that lets them kind of come to an understanding on their own, I think is really tricky. And the people that she has surrounded herself with for the first time, I think have the capacity to be able to do that. And yeah, it is such a powerful moment.
Yeah. And of course, she does ultimately stay for the benefit of her daughter, but also because I think she's realizing that she can make do with this place, and she has this sort of blossoming relationship with this other guy from her old work who seems to genuinely respect her and has a great relationship with her daughter, and it's a nice ending that is very predictable, I would admit. But I
Yeah.
think, what the two of them, Janet and Kimberly, do is just provide such sincerity to their roles that I really don't mind some of the easy to predict sort of plot points that are in this film, just because their chemistry is so great that it's a good hang of a
Yeah.
movie, I think.
Yeah. I will say I was a little bit concerned that the former coworker would have moved in with Mary
Mm,
Jo and Ava,
yeah.
and he didn't. And so I was like, haha, character growth right at the end there. I
Yeah,
love to see
right.
it.
Yeah, I think that is an important detail. So I think this is a really underrated performance and film that, I just don't really see a lot of people talking about these days, but, I think really still holds up in a
Yeah,
way. So,
absolutely.
okay. Well, shall we move on to our next
Yeah.
nominee? All right, Julianne Moore in The End of the Affair. So Julianne Moore gets her first Best Actress nomination here, although she is already an Oscar nominee by this point for Boogie Nights in Supporting Actress 2 years prior. But to introduce her here, this is a big one to introduce Julianne Moore. Born in North Carolina, but her father was in the army, so she was kind of a army brat, going all around America and Germany, and she acted in school plays, and she studied at Boston University. She did stage plays, but then she found a lot of success in TV as a regular on As the World Turns, the soap opera, where she played dual roles, a kind of good twin, evil twin type of thing, and she actually won a Daytime Emmy. So some early hardware for Julianne Moore, first of many. So then she's in a big stage production of Uncle Vanya in the early 90s, and then she breaks into movies. She's in The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, Body of Evidence, Benny and June, The Fugitive, and she's discovered by Robert Altman for his film Shortcuts, which gained her some attention. Plus, she's in Vanya on 42nd Street, and then she finally gets a proper leading role in film in Todd Haynes' Safe. So that is the start of a long collaboration between her and Haynes. She does quite a few independent films in the 90s, but she's also breaking into blockbusters too, like she's doing The Lost World Jurassic Park, for example, which is the same year as Boogie Nights. But Boogie Nights, she's playing a porn star. She gets a lot of attention, including critics' love and that Oscar nomination. She's also in The Big Lebowski in 98, so really working with a lot of great auteur directors. And then the year 1999, and she's in 5 films. She's in Cookie's Fortune, An Ideal Husband, A Map of the World, Magnolia, and The End of the Affair. Busy year. So with The End of the Affair, it's based on a book by Graham Greene, and she's working with Neil Jordan. It takes place during World War II in Britain, and the film is about Maurice Bendrix, played by Ralph Fiennes, a novelist who has an affair with a married woman, Sarah Miles, played by Julianne Moore, and the affair continues for years until she abruptly ends it one day, and eventually her husband wants to hire a private investigator to figure out if Sarah is having an affair. But Maurice kind of takes charge of hiring the investigator for him, which kind of doubles for Maurice himself trying to figure out if Sarah is now seeing someone else. So, interesting plot here. Let's get into it. Julianne Moore, Morgan, thoughts on the great Julianne Moore and her first Best Actress nom here?
I love Julianne Moore. And I think one of the things I was like looking through her filmography here and just going
Mm-hmm.
like, wow, she's another person that like when she shows up in something, I'm like, yes, we have this performer who is really just going to bring something sometimes very weird. Like shout
Yeah.
out to Maggie's Plan. I love the weird choices that she was making in that movie. I feel like only someone like Julianne Moore would be brave enough to really just be like, I'm going to take a slightly unlikable character on the surface and I'm going to make you second guess everything about this interaction or everything about this moment. I mean, Crazy Stupid Love, her early work, obviously, with Todd Haynes to now them collaborating again with May December. She just is such a great actor, such a great presence. And yeah, makes sometimes really just bold, like I wouldn't expect those type choices in a film, but they feel really right in retrospect. Again, I am thinking about her voice in May December. Like,
Yes.
I don't feel like anyone would have been able to portray such a tricky character like that. And like she obviously nails it. And so I find the film that we're going to talk about to be very interesting, because I feel that she is, where I had gripes about Annette Bening being underutilized, have no idea what poor Julianne was given with this very long period trauma. So yeah, it was quite a whiplash, I will tell you.
Yeah, something about these kids are all right actresses
Yeah.
trying to deal with somewhat weak material. Yeah, I love Julianne Moore, another one of my favorites who I'll watch even if the movie she's in looks bad, quite frankly. Like I will
Yeah.
see it for her. She is just one of those actresses who has that special something, I think, and always knows how to adapt herself. Also like Annette Bening, I would say. I think the end of the affair, not my favorite among this group. I think it's handsomely made, and it definitely evokes that classic Hollywood feeling. So I think it sort of works in being like a throwback, but I also don't super love the film overall.
No, I was very bored with the film, and it kind of felt like she was just having to work on autopilot the whole time,
Hmm.
because she was just like there. And I feel bad saying that because, again, like, man, her and Gloria Bell, another great like lead
Ugh.
performance where I'm just like, I also want to dance to Gloria with you. That just feels like a delightful thing. And I'm just watching this film with all of this history and going, what have you been given? Like, what drew
Mhm.
you to this project to be like, yes, I want to just put on a very basic British accent and just exist as a female character who could literally just be a cardboard cutout of a woman. Like, there is nothing here. And I feel so bad because, again, she is fantastic in pretty much everything, except for maybe
Mhm.
here, because what is she given?
Yeah. I am going to use a word that is often lobbied at certain kind of period films, but I do think overall the film does leave me cold.
Yes.
I think the affair is compelling in parts, but more so in the moments where like their connection is being tested more so than when they're actually together. But for Julianne, for me, like I think it's solid work. I think she does a pretty good British accent. I think she provides that icy sort of like unknowable quality that is sort of needed here, but also giving us those more vulnerable moments when she's afforded them, when like the facade is starting to crack a little bit. But I do feel like my enjoyment of her performance is hindered by the film being so focused on Ray Fiennes.
Yes.
And it is like that Annette Bening problem where it's like she can't really dominate her film so much like others can here. And I think she has less to do even than Annette Bening ultimately in her film.
Agreed.
But
Agreed.
I will say, just when she gets her moments, like in the back half of the film, and we start to
Mm-hmm.
see the story a little bit more from her perspective, she does bring it. She brings the emotion and the restraint that she kind of specialized in with this, and like Safe. And in a few years from now, we'll have Far From Heaven and The Hours, like these very repressed women who are like grappling with a lot of feelings that are conflicting and sort of having to manage that against the time period. Like for some reason she kind of does specialize in this kind of mode a
Mm-hmm.
lot. I don't know why. She kind of works in this type of area, even though I think ultimately her work in those other films are giving her a lot more to do ultimately.
Yeah. And I mean, I will say the film itself, I just kept confusing all of these white men and would have to
Oh
rewind
no.
and look up their faces to be like, who is this again? Because they
Hmm.
felt extremely interchangeable,
Yep.
extremely hollow. And I feel like if you can't even make men interesting, how are you even going to give a morsel of material to a woman? So I felt very bad for Julianne here because, again, she has such like a warmth in what she's doing most of the time. I mean, obviously, if she has to play a cold hard bitch, she will do it and everyone will love it. But
Hmm.
I feel like, especially in films that kind of do a disservice to women. She finds warmth to kind of help draw you in. And she could do nothing to save this film, though she tried her hardest. Yeah, like towards the end, I was just like, oh, I'm sad that she's dying, but at least she's going to be put out of her misery of having to hang out with these boring men.
Oh no.
It was just, I felt, again, cold is a great word for it, but just very, by the end, I was just like so disinterested that it blows my mind that this was even considered for the Academy Awards when she has 4 other films that year that you could look at and find way more nuance and material that really serves her as an actor.
Yeah. And ironically, those roles are more supporting ultimately.
This also feels, it feels supporting to me here though too, because it just feels like a lot of men talking about her. And I get that, screen time isn't necessarily what we should hinder what is a supporting or leading performance. But just because they talk about her constantly doesn't mean that she's actually doing anything. So that's why I was like, is it really leading, or are we just talking about her so much that we feel like it's a leading performance?
Yeah, I don't disagree, ultimately. And I think because of the nature of the film, her material is so limited for the first half that I just don't really have a lot to even really talk about there besides like she's his mistress, they have sex a lot, they talk sort of very intimately about their love for each other until we get to that point of the building being hit with a bomb that just sends him like hurling to the first floor, and he seems like he should have died, but he obviously doesn't. And when he comes back to her, she's kind of like shocked by her response being like, or she's shocked to see him, but then in her response is her kind of seeming a little disappointed, being like, oh, you're alive. And there's just kind of like a curious way that she says that line. It's like she's kind of disappointed there, at least from his perspective, and the feeling of inevitability that like this is it for them, and we don't know exactly why at first, but she says something like love doesn't end just because we don't see each other, that sort of thing. And she talks about like comparing it to her belief in God, and people love God even if they can't see him, and even though he's not really a fan of that kind of love, she says to him, like, maybe there's no other kind. I do think that there is a stylized element to this performance that I think she keys into very nicely. I think she feels like she is kind of in the world of the 50s or the 40s or whatever this is supposed to be taking place. So I do appreciate that element and her way of really saying these lines that can sound a little clunky, maybe to like an audience in 1999, quite frankly, and make that work.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things about Julianne Moore that I love so much is she is kind of a chameleon. Like you can believe her in a period piece. You can look at her and go like, oh yeah, she has for sure sent a text message where like there are some
she
people
knows what a microwave is.
Like and then again other times where it's just like, oh, like she has no idea that dinosaurs exist, and she just can bring that quality to film where not everyone can. So I mean, like as like an aesthetic, she fits the time extremely well, but that's about, I think, as nice or as in depth as I can get with this performance. I feel so bad. I love her so much. This, I just
listen. Not everything's gonna hit, you know.
It's
okay.
It at least makes me feel like her nomination for Still Alice is not her worst. It's not her worst.
It's not. It's definitely not.
Yeah.
So then when we do, just to talk about it, because there's not much else to even say with the performance ultimately, when we do get the switch of like the detective bringing him her diary, that's where we get more insight into her thought process through this whole affair. And she is kind of like sharing her frustration with him, twisting his words. And we see how like she actually went down to care for him after the whole bomb explosion, and she tried to revive him. and was just like very frantically trying to like breathe into him and everything and make him okay. I think just the physicality of that is nicely done, and she just believes he's fully dead and goes to pray, and that's where she kind of has her little ultimatum prayer with God there of saying like, I'll give him up forever, only please let him be alive. And then he turns out to be alive, which means that she has to like live up to that promise that she made with God ultimately.
Yeah.
And to just not see him anymore, which I guess I just would have wanted the film to be more balanced between them so that we can fully understand why she would make that sort of deal with God in a way.
Yeah.
Because like presented in the film, I don't know if it really builds up in a way that's like, oh, of course it's inevitable that she has this belief and now she has to break it off with him, and it's like, what a tragic sort of inevitable thing to happen. It's kind of just like, oh, okay, now we know at least something more about her. But it's just, for me, it doesn't really put in the work to give us that.
No, like it doesn't feel like it's a payoff. Like it just kind of feels like it's like, oh, here's what feels like should be a twist, but it's not actually a twist because there was nothing to make us. Because I think one of the things is, like, it doesn't feel like she's experiencing a dilemma. It's just like, oh, I'm acting weird, but I don't want to be with you. Yeah. And you're just like, okay, are we 12? I don't understand. Where I think if we had been able to give her material that's trying to be like, you are extremely conflicted. Because I also think that Ralph Fiennes' character is so boring that I'm just like, what do you see in him? Like, at least Mary Jo goes for bad boys. And here I'm just like, what are we doing, Sarah? But like, there's just no inner conflict that we can even get a glimpse of until all of a sudden it's like, look, it's in her diary. And it just feels so cheap to have that be, this is where we get any sort of nuance or insight or understanding into who she is.
Yeah, I unfortunately have to co-sign that. I think I tried to really invest myself in this and try to like get my mind into the mindset of like what the film is trying to do. But I just think also the way that it presents the story is kind of like deliberately confusing in a way. Not that I was like fully lost or anything, but just sort of really playing around with events happening and bouncing back and forth a lot, to the point that it starts to be more about that for me than like the emotional through line that we should be connecting to. So that's kind of where I struggle as well.
Yeah, I just find it ironic that, 20 years later, the men of the Academy say that, Greta Gerwig's Little Women is too hard to understand because of the time jumps. And yet they were like, this performance in this film that literally has no idea what it wants to say completely and is jumping around all the time is 100% a film that we dig. So I just find that very amusing.
Yeah. So nowhere to go but up for me with Julianne, which means I have some things to look forward to. So shall we move on to our next nominee here?
Please.
All right. Well, I'm not sure how this one's going to go, but Meryl Streep in Music of the Heart. All right, so here comes Meryl Streep getting her 12th Oscar nomination. She's now tied with Katharine Hepburn for the most Oscar nominations for any actor, and she's going to nearly double that in the years to come. This is the only actress here who I don't have to introduce because she has many previous Best Actress nominations, but there is a lot to talk about with how she got this role in Music of the Heart. So Music of the Heart originated from Wes Craven. Yes, the guy who made the Scream movies. This was his passion project, and he wanted to adapt this from a documentary, which is about Roberta Guaspari, this violin teacher who created this music program for inner city kids in New York. Madonna was originally attached to play this role, but she had creative differences with Wes. So Meryl steps in. She learned to play the violin in 6 weeks and bangs out this performance and gets that Oscar nomination. So Music of the Heart tells the story of Roberta, played by Meryl, who is separated from her husband and dealing with a messy personal life, and she gets the opportunity to be a substitute music teacher at an inner city school in East Harlem, and she takes on a very disciplined approach and is motivating them to learn to love the violin, and it becomes this very successful music program. But after the board threatens to end the program, she rallies the students and parents and teachers to save it. So let's talk Meryl. Thoughts on the marvelous Meryl Streep here and this performance that is perhaps not remembered among her nominations by most people.
No, I'd even some of her films that she's not nominated for. I don't know if you would pick this one out. But I do love Meryl. I mean, I grew up watching Defending Your Life, which I feel like is peak
Nice.
charming Meryl.
Yeah.
And of course, like anything that she's in, the woman has range. She can do Sophie's Choice and Mamma Mia, and you believe all of that.
That's true.
Yeah, I've always loved Meryl Streep. She just has such a dedication to the craft while also not seeming like, I guess for lack of a better word, a weirdo about it. Because I think that some people really just love to get super method and do it in a way that's just like you should talk to a therapist about it. Where I think she very much approaches even kind of like the more method-y tasks that she does, obviously learning the violin in 6 weeks by practicing pretty much, I think, what was it, 6 hours a day with a family is a bit cuckoo. That said, I feel like one of the things that I admire about her work is the dedication to learning something new as an avenue to find other people's humanity. And I feel like, again, she's kind of doing it in a way that it's like, I am learning and not a let me pretend to be a witch in my house and torment my family type thing. But yeah, I love Meryl Streep so much. I could probably talk about her all day. I mean, who can sing The Winner Takes It All and just rip your heart out and then 2 seconds later be dancing to Take a Chance on Me? Like, I love her so much.
I, of course, love her too. I've talked about my own feelings on Meryl many times on this show, so I don't need to reiterate anything here. Very curious what you think, though, of this movie. Which you've called a Lifetime movie.
It is a Lifetime movie. Look, I love Wes Craven. He was a Leo King. He has all of my favorite spooky movies. Scream is one of my all-time favorite films. Red Eye, I think, is an underappreciated classic.
Yes.
I like the fact that there is kind of a undertone of like, this is why art and music is important, but I think the execution of it is very long and drawn out and not as focused as it could be. It was giving like Mr. Holland's Opus, Freedom Writers type vibes. And while not a great movie, there are some elements and some parts in the film that I thought were really great that I think in a more trimmed down, focused film would have been particularly powerful. You know, like I just think about the way in which she has to navigate becoming a single mom as her marriage is dissolving and having to explain that to her children of saying like, your dad's leaving me, he's not leaving you. And that I know that that's hard to understand because he's not physically here. Like those moments were just so powerful. But again, the rest of the film, I was just like, why are we yelling at these small children who come from a lower socioeconomic status than you? Why are we doing this?
Yeah, I agree. I think Meryl is fine in this. Actually, you know what? I think she's good. I think she's good. I think she is delivering a dependably good Meryl Streep performance in a film that I mostly find to be that average TV movie of the week kind of thing. You know, I do think it's great that the real Roberta was able to do what she did with getting these kids to have a purpose and not giving up and really fighting for music education. Love anyone who's fighting for the arts and education because that tends to be the first thing to go when budget cuts are happening, as we actually see in this film. So that's cool. I think Meryl does a good job with the voice here, which I think is a little subtle, but she's got this specific like New York
Hmm.
flatness there that kind of works. That's different from her normal speaking voice. And her being strict ultimately, but not overly like personal and harsh with it. I think that's a very difficult needle to thread. So that's impressive, I think. But I also just feel like, and I'm not the first person to say this, if anyone else has been in this role, the odds of them getting nominated, I think, would have been significantly less, quite
Oh,
frankly.
absolutely. I feel like if Meryl did not have the reputation, especially at this time where I feel like 90s, 2000s, we're seeing her nominated pretty much almost every other year, either in Best Actress or Best Supporting Actress, because she loves a good, fun supporting role. Yeah, if she didn't have that reputation at this point in time, would this have been something that people would have gravitated to? Would they have thought that this is something that should be nominated? Probably not. And
Mm.
any other actor who had been given this opportunity probably would have also just been able to do it because it's not
Yeah.
a particularly complicated performance. Even though, again, there are elements of this where I think Meryl is just like so charming and so lovely and really kind of elevates the material a bit. I think a lot of people would have been able to coax through and do it. They just wouldn't have probably taken the 6 weeks to learn to play the
Right.
violin.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm very curious to see what the Madonna version of this even looks like, to be honest.
Yeah.
I struggle to even picture it, but would like to see it. Would love to have seen it. Yeah, I'm curious to just sort of break down her attitude when it comes to the classroom as she's trying to like wrangle the kids, like especially on that first day. She does definitely command respect and attention in a way that actually, when I think about it, at least among her nominations up to this point, she hasn't had the opportunity to be that like leader type
Hmm.
necessarily, which is interesting. I think we'll see that a lot more of that commanding Meryl in the 2000s, in the 2010s, Devil Wears Prada,
Yeah.
Doubt, the Iron Lady, even like that very authoritative voice that's also kind of in this film and in things like Prada and August Osage County is sort of played with a little bit more of a playfulness and a comedic tone. I'm just curious. I mean, you mentioned before that like she's being kind of mean almost to the children who are of a lower economic status to her. But what were your thoughts on just like that approach she took?
Yeah, I find it very interesting because we also have like another music teacher in the school who is, I feel like, very condescending to the children.
Yeah.
He's tenured though, so he can do that. Um, where like I think she, in a sense, kind of takes out her own insecurities on the children without consciously knowing that that's part of why she's being so commanding. Because I think like a great teacher does kind of demand some semblance of authority without having to sit there and be extremely strict. And I think that she comes in very unsure of that balance. I do think in the latter half of the film, we do see her finding that balance more because, these are children who, she's encountering children who are in homes where there's domestic violence, where there is gun violence, where, there's food insecurity. There are just so many other things at play that hinder their ability to practice the violin. And I think that kind of in her early scenes, she completely misreads the room and kind of understanding the lives that these children have. And she makes a lot of mistakes. But then she really does. There are times when I'm like, okay, she is clearly trying to learn to do better. Because again, there are kids who are like, I didn't practice because, or I don't have my violin because my parents are getting divorced and I forgot it at one parent's house. And she kind of has like these moments where she like takes a step back, which
Yeah.
I wonder if the real Roberta is kind of like speak first, realize later. if that's just like a character trait of hers, which I guess that could inform that performance, but I just kind of felt like, especially in the first half of the film, we see her kind of like establishing authority and then kind of realizing, oops, I may have really demoralized someone or forgotten their humanity. And now I have to backtrack to kind of make amends. And then again, in the latter half of the film, she does a much better job of not being like, she's strict, but I think she also sees these children and their environment and their home lives a little bit more than she does when she first enters the classroom.
Yeah, I agree. She gets better over time. I think I just find some of that to be a little repetitive
Yes.
ultimately, in the sense that like she's just going to launch into this whole thing, but then like criticize this one student for being late or forgetting or not practicing or anything, and then they're like, oh, my grandma died, or they're like, oh, I was in a drive-by shooting, or like,
Yep.
so all these different things, and it's just like it feels like we're just kind of hitting the same note over and over again, at least for me watching it. Obviously these things are horrible, that what these kids have been through, but just narratively speaking, it seems like we're not really stretching much beyond that sort of same note for me there. I do
Yeah.
enjoy this one moment though, when one of the parents actually complains about her kind of strict teaching style, and she promises to be nicer in class, and when she does try it out, you can see her really making like a very concerted effort to restrain from telling them that like they suck, basically.
Mhm.
And just like her trying very just like much more gentle approach, you can really see the straining to even do that in that way. And even the kids are like, what is wrong with you today? What are you doing? I
Yeah.
enjoy that scene.
Yeah, especially the little girl who complained to her mom is just going like, yeah, this is worse. I think was my
Yeah.
favorite reaction to it, because I'm like, yeah, it is like she does need to soften a little bit and it does get extremely repetitive. Like we could have just had a scene where it's just like, well, what is going on with everyone? And we could have gotten a little bit of a glimpse without having
Yeah.
to like wash, rinse, repeat kind of the same
Hmm.
thing with just a different awful part of what these kids are having to experience
Right.
in their lives. That's why I think if this had been trimmed down a little bit, if there had been more focus, we could have had one scene that helped kind of captured, yep, I'm a privileged white lady who doesn't know anything, and I'm kind of getting a wake-up call that, yes, I can be strict, but I also need to remember that there is a way of existence outside of my own. And it's my job to balance it, not these kids.
Hmm. Yeah. The only other thing I wanted to talk about with this, because I truly don't have too much else, unfortunately, because there's not much beyond the kind of
No.
surface level story ultimately, but just her personal life story I want to talk about, where she has this relationship that she's sort of building with this guy who she knew from her younger years, and it gives Meryl the opportunity to actually be more vulnerable, and she's kind of falling in love with him and even talking about marriage, but then he's kind of bristling at that, which makes her alarm bells go off, especially when he says he doesn't believe in marriage and the idea that they have to like fulfill all their emotional needs. And she says that with this very direct, like confrontational tone, she's like, so if I don't meet all your needs, you would go to somebody else. And there's also that breakdown moment a little bit after that, when one of the kids blames her for their father leaving because
Mhm.
she's mean to everybody. Like, that's what he says. I guess I just appreciate the moments that we do give her of trying to be in touch with her emotion, and like really trying to confront what is happening inside of her and trying to move on from her husband, who she still has these lingering thoughts for. So, I appreciate that we at least get some personal life in this rather than have it be just about her
Mhm.
teaching, because it could have
Yeah.
just been that.
I think her personal life stuff is more developed than
Yeah.
the actual work that she was doing with the children. And I think that that's kind of where she is strongest, because she can kind of flex her normal Meryl muscles to be
Yeah.
like, okay, like I'm going to be messy and complicated, but I'm also going to be super endearing and you're going to root for me, even though I'm kind of making a bad decision of dating this guy who kind of has really high unrealistic expectations of what a relationship is. And I've been in a relationship, and here I am having to rebuild my family. I do also love, J.O. Sanders is also in this film. He was in Tumbleweeds, also playing a man named Dan. Like, big year for him playing Dan's. It's very
typecast.
I know. But I mean, like, even that where, she goes on this date, her sons put an ad for her in the paper. I think that there is just kind of like this really lovely moment that they shared together where, especially women who are divorced, especially in this time, we're expecting them to find another man, to kind of find someone to fulfill this image that we expect of a family, even if it's blended. And I think that they shared like such a really sweet moment of going like, yeah, this was fun that we got to do this. And we both know that this isn't going, like, we know that this isn't going anywhere, even though he does kind of try to make a move on her. And yeah, I just think like those moments happen to be a little bit more nuanced and give her a bit more to do that you can't find always in a Lifetime movie.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think it's a solid performance from Meryl. It's a good performance.
Yeah.
I just feel like when we look at it, I feel like we can probably say with some certainty that, like, was this one of the top 5 lead actress performances of 1999? Probably not.
No.
But putting in solid work, it's Meryl.
Yeah.
Exactly. All right, let's get to our winner, Hilary Swank in Boys Don't Cry. So, Hilary Swank is officially our last Best Actress winner of the 20th century. So to introduce her here, Hilary Swank, born in Nebraska, but she grew up in Washington, and she lived a hard life as a child. She lived in a trailer park. Her parents were separated, and her mother encouraged her to follow her dreams of being an actress. So they drove to California, living out of their car until they could book roles for Hilary. And she did some TV guest star work in the early 90s. Her first film was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And then the next Karate Kid was her leading role breakthrough in 94. She was on Beverly Hills 90210, but she was actually fired after one season. And then she learned about Boys Don't Cry and went and auditioned for that and got the part. And it's a very interesting part. Obviously, the film is about Brandon Tina, a transgender man living in Nebraska. Real life story. He befriended this group, 2 of which are ex-convicts, John and Tom, and then Candace and Lana. He falls in love at first sight with Lana, and the 2 of them have a romance. Meanwhile, Brandon is in fear that he may be exposed as transgender, and when it does eventually come out, it ends in a very brutal tragedy. So let's talk our winner here, Hilary Swank, Boys Don't Cry. A fascinating one to talk about, especially in 2024. Thoughts on Hilary Swank overall and her first big Oscar-winning moment here?
Yeah, I will say I really miss Hilary Swank. I feel like she kind of does films. She's not really showing up in things where I'm like, yes, here we go, Hilary Swank of the late 90s, early 2000s, which could just be, obviously, I feel like partly her own choice. She has a family, she has other things in her life that probably starring in independent films that don't pay you well aren't on the top of her list. Mm-hmm. But, Boys Don't Cry was actually my first film of hers that I watched, and just watching her work over the years, I think she kind of has this power where she really just pays attention to people and really is looking to humanize them. I know that we're going to talk more about this film, but I feel like to have this be an early film in your filmography, to take the risk at a time when we really have a poor understanding and almost no language to be able to talk about and humanize the transgender community, the fact that this was something that she fought for, again, 2024, different world, would probably not cast Hilary Swank in this role, but I think for the time that this was happening, it just really showed and demonstrated her character as a person and as a performer to be like, these are the things that are important to me. It's not the money, it's not necessarily the recognition, it is more the let's show people that there are humans that are losing their lives because of ignorance. And, you know, again, I mentioned freedom riders. I know that that's a lot of a white savior film, but I think even in like some of those films and those performances, she really is kind of looking at trying to humanize people and lives that we very much misjudge and stereotype.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, and that is why I admire Hilary Swank. I think she is such a committed actress. She really is like a fighter and someone who does put in the work, and I think that work really does show itself more often than not. And it is unfortunate that Hollywood hasn't always known what to do with her, just like maybe Janet McTeer too, as a screen presence, because I think when she hits, she really hits.
Yeah.
And this is an example of her just coming out of the gate swinging and just putting in the time and the effort to get it right and to give this story just the seriousness that it deserves. Like you said, I think on a casting level, when we look back now on cisgender actors taking on trans roles, it's very understandable that this is now seen as problematic by some critics, especially trans critics and moviegoers. We probably wouldn't have this kind of thing happening today without significant backlash. And I think that is fair. I get that there are some people who want it to be like this no limitations thing of like anyone can play anyone. But like when Hollywood does repeatedly cast cisgender actors for trans roles, I think the window of opportunity for trans actors to get any roles gets even smaller.
Yeah.
And I do think, thankfully, things are finally starting to change incrementally over the past 5 or 10 years. We have Orange is the New Black, we have Pose, Euphoria. There are strides that are being made. I do think, unfortunately, there are still strides that need to be made more in film specifically.
Yes.
But it is worth noting that this casting does maybe read differently now than if, you know, now that there's more of a broad understanding of why this maybe isn't appropriate to do now.
Yes. Yeah. And I also feel like one of the things that I'm conflicted on, or at least maybe a little bit confused that this is the one that we're just like, Hilary Swank shouldn't have been in this role, when we again have Felicity Huffman just being as egregious as humanly possible in Trans America. You then a few years later have Jared Leto, really just a sin against humanity in all senses of the phrase, but especially in his performance that he wins an Oscar for in Dallas Buyers Club. You know, I feel like of all the people who have in retrospect actually taken a look at their work, Hilary Swank has been vocal about saying, like, I don't think in the 21st century I should be cast in these types of projects, because there are trans actors who deserve this opportunity to cultivate and share the history of their community. That said, in 1999, the fact that she wanted to humanize a community that, I mean, the year prior, we have the murder of Matthew Shepard, you know, the fact that this is also a queer filmmaker, you know, this wasn't being made just by straight cisgender white dudes. There were people who were invested in trying to get the story and the humanization of Brandon Tina right, even if some of the other characters there are some historical inaccuracies there. Obviously, in the film, Philip Devine, who was a disabled Black man who was also murdered, is completely omitted from the film. And so, like, those are some inaccuracies and, you know, historical reworkings that I think nowadays we should make sure that we're including the full picture of the events. You know, again, in 1999, to be able to have a film that humanizes a trans man and really shows that, like, they should not be murdered. Like, this is a problem. and sharing Brandon Tina's story at a time, again, when we don't have the language or the understanding. Hilary Swank really does just like such a powerful job of making Brandon a human and not a headline.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's why I don't want to fully judge this with 2024 eyes, even while acknowledging that issue, because this was a time when the LGBT community was fighting for any representation at all, and this was a landmark film in making people understand that humanity of the trans community. And this film and Hillary's win, I think, gave that a broader platform that I think was necessary. So when I look at the performance beyond the casting discussion, I think she's kind of incredible. Like, I think she really digs into Brandon's humanity and also like his charisma, his bravado, kind of the Southern gentleman sort of thing that he can have at times. And I think you really just see this bright kind of spirit, and that's what makes it all the more tragic when that is taken away so too soon. But then the other part of it is, I think you really sense the kind of paranoia and the fear of being clocked and like having to constantly be on his guard at all times, and sometimes relaxing when he's with Lana or just like hanging out with his friends, but still just having just like this almost like a tightness, and just like very intentionally choosing every word and how he says it. But at the same time, it's also not to the point of being stilted or like awkward necessarily, because he does have this smooth sort of charm to him that comes out. So I think it's a performance that Hilary really worked hard to nail.
Yeah.
But in a way, I think, I don't know if this tracks, but like that effort that she's making also works in sort of showing Brandon's nervousness and like his hope that he's getting to a place of acceptance from these other people, and also for like accepting himself too.
Yeah. I mean, like, it is there are two things that Brandon has to hold that I think Hilary Swank does such a great job of having Brandon's authenticity, because again, like, he is moving through the world as a man. He is really trying to find ways to solidify that authenticity, in legal terms as well. And at the same time, even though he is charismatic, he is always on edge because he is so worried that people will find out what the layers of that authenticity mean. And it is both so compelling and so heartbreaking, because you're just like, he is living his life, but he can't share kind of the deepest journey that he's having to go through with others, because he's afraid that they're not going to understand it. And he knows the risk is, death. And I think Hilary Swank does such an incredible job of really holding those two pieces at the same time. And it's just simultaneously letting Brandon be joyous and boisterous and outgoing, while also having him, required to have his guard up at all times. And I also think Swank and Chloe Sevigny are incredible together. I just love their chemistry. Yeah. I think that they both really understood what the story was. And I know that the real Lana Tisdale felt that her performance was kind of seen as like, a quote unquote hillbilly or like uneducated. But upon this rewatch, I just found that performance to be just really beautiful, because Lana kind of is keying in and kind of tuning in that there's something a little bit more to Brandon, but there is just like such a love and acceptance that I think, having that character, having that scene partner then kind of allows Hilary Swank to really delve into Brandon's humanity and his hopes and dreams for the future. And I think if we didn't have someone that character could be opposite of, because again, while this is based off of true events, who knows, the totality of who these people were. But having those moments of Brandon and Lana together, I think really just elevates who Brandon was and kind of highlights the tragedy of us being robbed of who he could have also become.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the scenes that they have together, even from the start when he is seeing Lana at the bar and just that look of like full like infatuation
Yeah.
in his face. I think is really beautiful, especially when he's watching her sing. There's another moment, another one from early on where they go to her house and she's just like, "Don't look at my stupid house." And he just says, "I'm not looking at your stupid house, I'm looking at you." And it's
Mm-hmm.
just this like fully earnest kind of expression of love there and on his face. I think again it's a little bit of that like southern gentleman kind of charm in moments like that that make you feel how Brandon was this bright kind of spirit and why Lana fell in love with him, and also for him why he felt comfortable in opening up further and further, because she, to your point with Chloe's performance, I think is so accepting and warm with him that you see some of those walls kind of coming down over
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah, and I really just love their time together because I think that really helps anchor so much of kind of Brandon's future planning because I feel like we're introduced very early on that he is looking to have surgery, he's looking to, take the steps to legally have his documentation as male. And the hope that they give each other for a future, I think, is it kind of, even though the tragedy that's coming, I think that they together are just so remarkable that it kind of makes you forget where our journey is going to end. And you just feel so present with them as performers. And then, even having Swank with like Peter Sarsgaard, who is ultimately just the worst of the worst. I do have to give Peter Sarsgaard some credit here. I read that one of the things that he was trying to do was not make the character bad from the get-go, because he was like, why would anyone want to hang out with this person? And I
Right.
think he does such a great job of saying, like, of having this character be someone that's like, oh yeah, I'm cool, I'm fun. And then the minute that he is confronted with someone that is not exactly like him, he switches. And I think if we didn't have someone that understood that, we wouldn't have kind of been able to believe, like, why would Brandon put himself in that situation? Why would he surround himself with these types of people? And,
Right.
I do like Swank and Sarsgaard together, like there was like that, you felt them becoming friends. You felt Brandon feeling like he was being accepted for who he was. And again, where we have Lana, who is extremely accepting, who won't ask questions, but also feels very open to hearing truths. The Peter Sarsgaard character turns out to be an ignorant murderer at the end of the day.
Yeah, it really does. You feel this creeping sense of dread, I think, as the
Mm-hmm.
film goes on, which is a credit, I think, to also Kimberly Pierce's direction. So to the point where he is eventually sent to jail because of like this faulty check situation, that's where things really take a turn, and you
Yeah.
feel just the pressure that's really showing itself on Brandon's face. Like when Lana comes and sees that he's in the women's jail cell and he tries to explain it away and sort of come up with excuses, and he says he's a hermaphrodite, kind of like whatever it takes to smooth over this situation. And then again, like the panic that turns into a relief in a way when Lana says she doesn't care about any of that,
Mm-hmm.
that she doesn't mind. I think that is really elegantly done just as a scene and in Hilary's performance to kind of show just how almost on edge and like shamed he feels in this moment, but then to realize that he still has Lana even after all this, it's just such this beautiful like washing away of like all of that panic. So I think
Yeah.
that's a great scene for her.
Yeah. To then immediately reintroduce that panic with the men in this film, I think
Yeah.
again, a credit to Kimberly Pierce as a filmmaker of just being able to lull you into a sense of security and be like, guess what? Everything is supposed to be bad here. Like, this is the journey that we're on. And I think Swank does that so well too, because I feel like even if you are an actor, it can be very easy to have the full journey in your mind as you are giving your performance, because you know where it's supposed to end. And so maybe you want to add a little bit in there. And I feel like in those moments where Brandon lets down his guard, Swank does such a really incredible job of being extremely present so that you as an audience can also kind of release some of that tension and be present and grounded with them. And then again, when Brandon then is confronted with the bigotry of the men in this community, Swank really puts that and elevates that, oh no, we're in danger, and takes you with her in her performance.
Yeah, it's so brutal. The third act of this film is just like seeing the depths of hell, truly, of like what humanity can be. And, you know, when everyone does find out, and, you know, John and Tom, they expose him in front of everyone, it's just really, really uncomfortable. You know, Kimberly Pierce just not shying away from showing you everything, which I think has also been criticized a bit in terms of like maybe they wouldn't go as far today with just showing the extent of all of these humiliations that Brandon is facing. But just in Hilary's performance, I think the raw kind of emotion on display with what he goes through there, especially at the police station, as he's describing how they raped him and the police not really taking it seriously or really being very sensitive with it at all, and just being very accusatory. Like, it's so heartbreaking because in her performance there is just like this helplessness there that's so tragic, of realizing that not only have John and Tom like threatened him that they'll go after him if he goes to the police about this, to kind of internalize that, but then to have the cops be so dehumanizing and cold. It's just this added layer of him just feeling like this is it, like just feeling hopeless, and him just barely even gasping out some of his responses. I think it's just so uncomfortable to watch, intentionally so.
Yeah, just very heartbreaking. And I think that Swank kind of adds this vulnerability to it that it just kind of makes it even more painful, because you are watching Brandon. He knows the risks. He has always known the risks. That's kind of presented very early on in the film. And to watch that materialize, and him trying to do the right thing of trying to be like, look, I know that I've been threatened, but I'm supposed to go and report this, and I'm supposed to tell people. There is a scene where, obviously, because Brandon was raped, he goes to the hospital to have an exam, and there's a moment between Hilary Swank and this character actress who's on set playing a nurse for a day that I think is just one of those scenes that, you know, I remembered it, but like rewatching it, I just had a lump in my throat the minute it started. And it's so powerful just to have, I think Swank is just so good. She feeds off of other people's presence in a room. And, you know, as Brandon is breaking down with this nurse and this nurse is comforting him, I think Swank really kind of elevates and takes that humanity, and it to then right after that have him in front of the police who are just dismissive and don't believe him and basically are treating him as if he deserved what happened to him.
Yeah.
Just those emotional beats and that emotional whiplash is, again, anchored by Swank and her performance.
Yes, I'm really glad you mentioned that scene, because it is so small, but I think is key that it's not so unrelenting as a film, that it's just like this constant state of negativity necessarily, but just those ebbs and flows of, yeah, like Brandon just trying to negotiate with just being himself in a room with another person. It's just really hard to watch at times, but I think also sadly still relevant all these years later to the queer experience and wanting to live your authentic truth. But there's always going to be assholes out there who could put you in harm's way, especially, you know, at that time taking place in 1993. But I think still today there are issues that are still relevant today, which is really sad that it does resonate in that way all these years later.
Absolutely.
But I honestly don't even want to talk about the end of the film because it's so viscerally upsetting.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you have any thoughts there?
I mean, I think it's also a testament to Pierce as a filmmaker. And I think, gosh, I would just love Pierce and Swank to team up again, because I think that they really understand each other as creatives and understand the stories in which they're trying to tell. And I think if we hadn't have had Hilary Swank as our guiding light through this film, that ending would, again, I think it would be more of a shock value and not so much of a, this is what happens when ignorance wins. You know, Swank can only be as good as the material that she's given. And I think, you know, I know Pierce co-wrote this, and the way in which she shot it it doesn't necessarily shy away from the violence, but I also don't feel in which it is extremely gratuitous or exploitative, where I think in another filmmaker's hands, we probably would have gone that route.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's super visceral, and it's the feel bad time of all of these films. And I really just have to credit Pierce with not shying away from it. Again, not exploiting it to make it showy or after school especially, but of really just saying, like, this is what happened to a human, and it happens to other people in the trans community too.
Yeah. I just keep thinking about how tricky so many things are in this film, and the sort of casting stuff aside, I think it does hold up surprisingly so 25 years later for a film about the trans experience, when, to your point, there wasn't much language going on in the mainstream, at least, of how to even talk about these things.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, I worked in the mental health field, and it was not until not too long ago that we were finally dispelling this idea that being queer, being trans, being part of the LGBTQ community was some type of quote unquote mental illness. And so the fact that a helping profession was so far behind in language and understanding just proves that in 1999, there was just such a lack of humanity being given to the community. And for a film that was not given a lot of language, a lot of resources, I think it's really remarkable what they were able to do with this film and Swank's performance.
Well, to pivot now to something perhaps a little more frivolous, we're now going to talk about the Oscar race here and how Hilary won. So Hilary Swank, she won the New York Film Critics, she won the LA Film Critics, Boston, Chicago, Dallas, Fort Worth, as well as the Critics' Choice Awards. She was pretty much the Critics' Sweeper of the Year. She also won at the Golden Globes. Janet McTeer, she won the National Board of Review and the other Golden Globe in the comedy category, where she wasn't facing off against anyone here. But that's when things get a little more complicated, because then Annette Bening wins at SAG, and she also won the BAFTA, which was after the Oscars technically, but had some British support, I suppose you could say. But technically, Boys Don't Cry hadn't come out in Britain yet, so was not eligible. So that may have changed things there. But Julianne Moore, Meryl Streep, they got their nominations here and there, but weren't really in contention to win at any point. So yeah, here's the big question here, Morgan. Why do we think Hilary Swank won this Oscar?
I think it's twofold. So one is, if we're starting to see competition between Swank, Annette Bening, and Janet McTeer, let's just put those three together, because again, Julianne and Meryl were just happy to be there. Janet McTeer is in a tiny independent film that straddles a lot of, again, while it is a comedy, it's also a dramedy. I mean, the film literally starts
Yeah,
with domestic violence. So
true.
there are some elements that it's like, it's not a straightforward comedy. It's not a straightforward drama. We also know that the Academy hates to have a good time. So comedies just kind of are not in the forefront. Annette Bening obviously is an unlikable woman, so they have a really hard time awarding and recognizing women who are not pristine and perfect. That said, I also think for a time where the LGBTQ plus community is obviously slowly starting to come into the conversation in cinema and creative arts, I also don't think that there is a lot of cultural understanding of the trans community. But I think what helps Swank in this kind of race is she is so grounded and so human. And I think if you're looking at a performance that people can rally behind, that feels very easy to do for someone who is just giving so much humanity in their film.
Yeah, it's interesting because it is a very small film compared to Best Picture winner American Beauty, right? Which makes this an interesting race in that sense too, that it was able to overcome that smallness when we hadn't really seen a movie like this kind of emerge in this way
Yeah.
on this small of a budget, winning Best Actress in quite some time.
Yeah. And I don't really think we really see that happening even nowadays. I mean, I think even more recently with Frances McDormand winning for Nomadland, it's because so many of the showier budget, big budget films got pushed because of the pandemic. And so that opened the race up for smaller films and more nuanced performances. And so the fact that, again, we have multiple performances here from very tiny independent films in actual serious contention, I think is kind of remarkable. And I don't think that we've ever really seen that.
Yeah. But from what I read of the coverage at the time, Janet McTeer, Julianne Moore, Meryl Streep were pretty much ruled out. And it was thought to be this battle of Bening versus Swank. Even the Vegas odds had them both like tied at the top there. But more often than not, people kind of said that as long as voters really watched Hilary's performance, that she would win. Some of the coverage was kind of saying like, Annette Bening, she's in the likely Best Picture winner. She won at SAG. She's very popular in the industry, and that may be what just carries her to a win. But then with Hilary Swank winning all those critics awards, kind of like having the most buzzed about performance of the year, that it's going to be tight. And I think it was. It would not surprise me if this was decided by like a handful of votes, honestly. I do think what voters saw was something that was new and exciting and daring, you could say. And, Hilary is also carrying her whole film. She transforms significantly. And I think also it's probably worth noting here that this is going to be the start of that kind of thing moving forward in this category of voters really being impressed by the transformation. You compare that to her biggest competition, Annette, and I think there were some who maybe felt that Annette was too unlikable, too cartoonish, that she wasn't really the takeaway compared to everything else going on in American Beauty, and they maybe wanted to spread the wealth a little bit.
Yeah, I do love the fact that there was a lot of critic support for Swank.
Yeah.
Because again, I feel like in an independent film where I think she made $3,000 on the film, did not qualify for health insurance. And it really just kind of felt like the film and the little film and the little performance that could kind of thing.
Yeah. And that's the benefit of critics and critics awards is that they can really propel a performance forward that is in a smaller thing that people are like, oh, I have to check this out. And I think that's really what happened here. And I did just want to shout out Hilary's speech, even though people have talked about how she forgot her husband to thank in that.
That's fine.
It's fine. I do love that she used male pronouns when she describes Brandon, even though Brandon's family was apparently upset about that. I think that was a very powerful statement at a time when even some of the press coverage that I was reading from, again, some of that analysis was using language like cross-dressing and woman who pretends to be a man, like that sort of thing. There just wasn't really a clear language for people at the time. And so, I appreciate Hilary for not just making this like, oh, this is going to be a great role for me, but that she really went above and beyond and understood the responsibility that she had with telling Brandon's story.
Yeah, it is
So,
such a great speech. I rewatched it as well. And
mhm.
again, I was struck by the fact that she took the time to thank as many people on production as she could in her time allotted. Because as she said, we made this for no money. So no one has given you recognition for this film. And then to make sure that she capped it off, because I feel like people remember the ending of a speech more than they remember the beginning. But to make sure that she mentioned Brandon and used his pronouns and really talked about him in a very human, vulnerable, loving way was just perfect.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, well, I think it's time to get to the many Twitter questions that we got for this end of the century, end of the decade. So let's start with a somewhat loaded question, but why not? From Richard Thompson, who said, is this a rare case of the Academy watching a performance and knowing they couldn't go any other way without looking like absolute fools?
No, because they gave Meryl Streep an Oscar for The Iron Lady. So they are okay looking like fools all of the time.
Fair point.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm sorry, that was low-hanging fruit. Yeah, I think that
She
Hilary,
can take it.
yeah. She has a bajillion Oscar nominations. She can handle me criticizing one of her wins. Yeah, no, this was Hilary Swank giving a really beautiful performance and people actually watching the films that were nominated. Because I think, again, that's the big thing.
Which should be like the first thing that's like, the bottom basement expectation of voters. But yes,
yes,
they watch
I mean,
the
like
films.
the fact that leading up to the Oscars, there are so many people saying like, oh, I still need to watch all of these films. And Kirsten Dunst is the only one that's like, my job as an Academy member is watching all of the films in contention. Just shows that that's not the norm. So yeah, I think people actually watched the film. And because of all of those critics wins, Swank was able to be kept in the conversation.
Rob Montoya said, Swank's win 25 years ago was critically acclaimed and a rare win in a small independent film. There's a lot of discussions today about the casting of Brandon. Even Swank has questioned her own casting. Agree or allow the casting/performance to remain without question? I mean, I agree with the questioning of her casting. I think an out trans actor would be best to, fill the role today. But I don't think that should completely overshadow the performance that she gave.
Yeah.
So it is nuanced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We can hold two truths at the same time, which is in 1999, Hilary Swank took a film that probably would have derailed other people's careers and showed that you can humanize people who don't look like you and exist in the world the same way that you do. And in 2024, we can cast trans actors in their own stories about their community.
Both JPS and Ben Roberts kind of had the same question, so I just combined them. If Hilary Swank had won for $1 Million Baby before Boys Don't Cry, basically what would have happened? Like, would she still have won for Boys Don't Cry?
I think Boys Don't Cry is the better win and the better performance. So I think she would have been nominated. I just think it also depends on like what year she was. Like if we're transporting all of 2024 to 1999 and then transporting everyone from the 99 category into 2004, I don't think it would have radically changed.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I got a similar question about Jodie Foster back when I was covering her 2 wins. And I actually kind of have a similar response, which is that I don't really even see the reverse even happening in that order, like career-wise. Just like I can't see Jodie Foster doing Silence of the Lambs and then The Accused, I don't really see $1 Million Baby happening before
Yeah.
Boys Don't Cry. And Kimberly Pierce, I don't think, would even want Hilary Swank if
Mm-mm.
she's already an Oscar-winning star to be in Boys Don't Cry. So I'm sorry if that like broke the question, but that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah.
Cyan Kelly said, Hillary gave a very solid performance that was a deserving winner, but the other half of me wishes Annette won, since this is probably the best chance she'll ever get, appearing in a Best Picture winner. What other winners do you like but feel emotionally conflicted about?
Jessica Chastain,
That's a good one.
like,
Yep.
should have won for Zero Dark 30. Do I love that she won for Tammy Faye? Not particularly. Was she in a really weak year? Yes. So I feel
Yeah,
better about it, but Jessica Chastain.
that's a great answer.
Thank you.
This is a very obvious answer coming from me, but I like that Olivia Colman won her Oscar for The Favorite, but I was not happy that she won that night because I was extremely invested in Glenn Close winning, and I was pulling for her very hard. So it did make me very emotionally conflicted, even if, it's like if I didn't like Olivia, somehow that would be like
Yeah.
strangely easier to accept of like kind of reconciling like, ugh, Glenn was robbed. I'm so upset. But then like Olivia gave this great performance too. So it's just like
Yeah.
very emotionally conflicting.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be mine.
It's a good one.
Shocker. Uh, Matt Stillman and Christoph both want to know, was this Annette Bening's best shot at winning the Oscar? Well, first of all, never say never.
Yeah.
As we know from Naiad, never give up. So,
Yeah.
I think it was her best shot of her nominations, though,
Yes.
personally.
Yeah. I just hope that Mike Mills makes another movie with her, because I'll start that awards campaign if they need me to.
Hell yeah.
I know it'll be amazing. But yeah, I feel like if Annette wasn't still working, that we would be like, yes, for sure. But we can still hold out hope that
Yeah.
she's given material and is in a year where she can really be recognized.
Absolutely. Fritz said, Annette is today often seen as the best thing about American Beauty. Is this correct? And if she had one, how would this win be seen today? I mean, I think she's the best
Yes.
part of the movie. What about you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, there's a lot that I struggle with in that movie. Annette Bening is not one of them. I think my biggest complaint in regards to her is completely outside of her control. And how would it hold up? I think it'd be a very mid win, because again, she's not given the depth in which she can go.
Yeah, I think people would be happy that she won an Oscar, and it would have been like, yep, this is kind of in line with like the popular kind of winners of the 90s, the Gwyneth Paltrows and the Helen Hunts and that kind of thing, and winning with a film that was a Best Picture winner. I do think that maybe even like Hillary's loss would be seen as like a heartbreaking one for some. So that's kind of interesting, but also maybe I could see people being like, oh, Hillary's film was too small. Annette Bening was in the Best Picture winner. So it is interesting, I think, that you can sort of justify either of them winning / losing in a weird way, which I don't think you get most of the time. Just interesting. Jack Mahanes said, how did American Beauty get on such a sweep, but Bening was not able to be along for the ride? I think Hillary's performance just kind of moved people more, ultimately. And Annette's performance, like I was saying, was not universally loved, I'll just say.
Agreed.
John Anzalone said, I know Swank was fantastic and hers is a win that makes sense on paper, but Bening was a prior acting nominee in the Best Picture winner who won SAG, so was her loss a big surprise? Maybe to some, maybe even to her after winning SAG, but I don't think on the whole it was seen as a surprise, just because I did see a lot of people just expecting Hillary to win, or at least holding out hope that she would win. So I wouldn't call this a shocking upset kind of a win necessarily.
Yeah, like it didn't feel like, all of a sudden she came out of nowhere and won this award. but I do think that it was a close race. Maybe not Cate Blanchett, Michelle Yeoh close, but certainly
Right.
a close race.
Andy Bayless has another swap situation here. If Being Julia was released in 1999 and American Beauty in 2004, does Hilary Swank still win the double, assuming both Million Dollar Baby and American Beauty in 2004 are nominated for Best Picture? Yeah, I think so. I think nothing changes,
Yeah.
quite frankly.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see Annette Bening winning for Being Julia over Boys Don't Cry. If she couldn't win for American Beauty, I don't think she would win for Being Julia.
No, agree.
Declan Cashin has an interesting one. Could they have run Bening in supporting, and would she have won in that instance?
I mean, again, I feel like she's given not a lot to do for what she is capable of doing. So, I mean, maybe, but who won supporting that year?
Angelina Jolie for Girl Interrupted.
I feel like that's a really hard performance to overcome.
Yeah.
So
Maybe.
would have been contentious race there too.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, I think today campaigning, she would probably be in supporting, would be my guess, because that just seems to be what we do more often than not, is that like films can only have one lead. Just, it's not even like a gender thing. It's like that sort of like Green Book thing of like, why is Mahershala Ali in supporting when he's like a two-hander here? But anyway.
Yeah. I mean, you could be Judas and the Black Messiah and have no leads. Everyone's in supporting.
That's true. No one's a lead. Imagine that. Judas, Black Messiah. Nope. Yeah, if they did that in 1999, though, I think Annette Bening could win, even over Angelina Jolie. But I do think she is a co-lead, personally. Jeffrey Kerr said 1999 marked the last time BAFTA took place after the Oscars. Had they been a precursor then, would Annette Bening have won? Or would it have been like 2002, where Daniel Day-Lewis and Christopher Walken won SAG and BAFTA in their respective categories, but still lost the Oscar? This is just complicated by the fact that Boys Don't Cry wasn't eligible for BAFTA. So it's hard to say that anything changes. You know, we don't know if they would have gone for Boys Don't Cry. I don't know.
Yeah. I also feel like BAFTA is not the strongest predictor for like a precursor, because I feel like...
Especially not then.
No, and like even now, I think, you know, I look back like a couple years ago, like literally there was no crossover. They just literally were doing their own thing in Best Actress, and totally fine. Love that vibe. But I think, you know, where there's at least some voting body overlap in SAG could sometimes be a little bit more of a better indicator, though obviously we know that that's not always the case.
Right. The Ghost of Glenda Miss Jackson, If You Nasty, as well as Ben Roberts, both want to know if we think American Beauty as a film deserves to join the group of Big Five winners. Big Five, for those who don't know, is Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Screenplay.
No, that's my answer.
I knew that you would say no.
Yeah.
Not for me really either. Maybe I'll explore that in this next question, actually, because Greg Adams said American Beauty almost won the Big Five, parentheses, poor Annette. Of these five categories, which one would you have preferred to see it lose? Well, I'm going to take Annette out of this since she already lost. I don't want to keep beating up on her. I would prefer to see Kevin Spacey lose.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't know if that's a lot of argument there. I actually would have preferred in that category if they went with Richard Farnsworth for The Straight Story, which is a lovely, lovely performance from a David Lynch film.
That feels
just saying.
Right. Yeah. I mean, honestly, in retrospect, I don't know if I would have awarded it as much in general. So Best Actor feels like a good place to start.
Okay. We can agree on that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Diego A. Cabrera said, if she were nominated today for the same performance, would Annette get more or less hate than for her Naiad nomination? I would say less hate.
Yeah.
There was a lot of not happy people when she got that Naiad nomination.
Yeah.
I remember.
I mean, I didn't like Naiad or the performance, but yeah, I think if we had known what was to come, maybe people would have been less visceral in their hatred for her
True.
nomination for American Beauty.
Here's a fun one from Jordan, who said, which Best Actress winning character would you most back to sell this house today? I'm going with Erin Brockovich. I think she can sell a house to me, and I'd be like, absolutely. Take my money.
Yeah. Yeah, she's a fast talker. I think that she would be able to do it. Or even Evelyn, I feel like in Everything Everywhere All at Once, she would kind of also be someone that would be like, I'm gonna show you how this is your house, and you're gonna leave with
That's true.
the signed papers.
Yeah, I think that's a great one, actually. Greg Cremeen said, I really like Janet McTeer and wish she was in more lead roles. What nominated performances from the 90s do you think she could have performed successfully?
I mean, low-hanging fruit, but Clarice, Silence of the Lambs. Let's get her with the FBI.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I would love that. I could sort of see her doing Jessica Lange's role in Blue Sky, which is not a great film, but it's got that Southern thing to it, which is like, direct 1-to-1 with Tumbleweeds. But 6 Degrees of Separation, there's Passion Fish, there's so many
Thelma and Louise
roles that she could.
Who does she play
why not?
in it, though?
Yeah, I don't know. I could weirdly see her doing both.
I know.
Not in the same movie, but like she could do either role.
Parent Trap. Janet McTeer plays both Thelma
there we
and
go.
Louise.
Wow, your mind. Speaking of which, Chelsea, Galaxy Brain Time. Halloween Town culture has touched our Best Actress nominees twice. Which Best Actress would you like to see in a Halloween Town sequel and or Disney Channel original movie?
Sigourney Weaver.
Wow. She unfortunately is not a Best Actress winner.
Oh,
but
I thought it said
nominee.
I thought it said nominee. Sorry. Winner. Okay.
I don't know if it's specialized. It says winner. It's just which Best Actress. She was a Best Actress nominee. I don't know.
If we went with winner, then let's have Julianne Moore. She won in 2014. Let's have her go to Halloween Town.
That would be fun. I went with Olivia Colman here.
It's a good one.
I think Olivia would be fun. Or like a Michelle Yeoh. Huli Gone said, how did Janet McTeer, an unknown actress in an unwatched movie, make it without social media and Frances Fisher?
Maybe she had her own version of a Frances Fisher. I wasn't there. I don't know.
I mean, I think she was just talked about. She's another one like Boys Don't Cry, where she was a critic's favorite early on, and she picked up those critics wins, and she won the Golden Globe, and that was it. Yeah,
the film got some recognition at Sundance, so I think that kind of helped start people rallying the troops.
Christoph said, was Julianne Moore close to being a double nominee? Why did the Academy give her a lead nomination for a good but not great performance in a tepid film, rather than a supporting nomination for her great performance in Magnolia? Was it just easier to get in for lead, as supporting is so packed? Yeah, well, she won the National Board of Review in Supporting Actress for 3 films, which were Magnolia, An Ideal Husband, and A Map of the World. I don't know if there was any kind of vote-splitting situation there, but you would think that Magnolia would probably be the push for supporting for her.
Yeah, I feel like there were a lot of really good supporting performances that kind of missed. I mean, even like Natalie Portman and Anywhere But Here kind of missed. Kirsten Dunst was doing a lot of supporting work. We had, Election, which I feel like maybe even then, even though Tracy Flick is our heroine of the story, we might have put Reese Witherspoon in supporting. Just because, again, Matthew Broderick gets to be the lead of the film. So, yeah, I just think it's really packed.
Yeah. Ed said, why do you think Julianne Moore was nominated for The End of the Affair this year, but not for her more critically acclaimed performance in 1995's Safe by Todd Haynes? Well, Safe was very under the radar even at that time compared to this kind of splashy period piece, The End of the Affair, that's much more mainstream and probably more palatable to more audiences than Safe was, which is very bleak at times, and again, very, very low budget kind of thing. you know, it's what happens to movies every year, as I'm sure you know, as you have talked about independent performances in films a lot. They just go under the radar.
Yeah, absolutely. And a period piece always helps. That seems to be the bread and butter that the Academy likes.
Yeah, we hate being in contemporary times.
How dare we?
Apparently. Yes. Let's see. Jonathan Edwards said, did Julianne Moore miss a supporting nomination in Magnolia because this was probably the best and most competitive supporting actress lineup of the past 40 years? Coburn could have picked out any of the other nominees' names out of a hat and it would have been a deserving win. Thoughts on the supporting actress race? Well, we already kind of talked about it a little bit, but just to give people a reminder of the nominees, Angelina Jolie in Girl Interrupted was the winner, Toni Collette in The Sixth Sense, Catherine Keener in Being John Malkovich, Samantha Morton in Sweet and Lowdown, and Chloe Sevigny in Boys Don't Cry. A banger lineup.
Yeah. Honestly, stronger lineup than the Best Actress lineup.
I was going to say, yeah.
Yeah, I really do think that you really could have drawn anyone's name and it would have felt like it was a deserved win.
Yeah, like I would have been very happy if Chloe Sevigny won for Boys Don't Cry. That's a beautiful performance.
Beautiful performance. Yeah. Toni Collette crying in a car about her mom.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oscar.
Jeremy Kaplan, this is more one for me, I suppose, but is it just me, or does the title Music of the Heart sound like a mashup, or maybe a smash up, of all of Susan Hayward's nominations? Susan Hayward. I totally agree. Very similar to With a Song in My Heart, you know, and I definitely could see Susan Hayward putting in the work to learn the violin, and I could also see her yelling at kids. So I think this is a movie that's after Susan Hayward's own heart. Owen Daly said, is learning to play the violin worthy of earning an Oscar nomination?
If you're Meryl Streep, yeah.
If you're anyone else, good luck.
Yeah. I mean, you probably wouldn't sound as good as Meryl Streep. 6 weeks is not a long time to learn to play the violin. Yeah, I feel like that is something that the Academy loves when Meryl does, which is learn a new trick. And they're just like, yes, more of that, please.
Yes. I love Meryl and her bag of tricks. John T. said, Music of the Heart is the only movie Wes Craven ever made to get an acting nomination. Do you think there are any other performances in his filmography that should have been nominated?
How much time do we have? So many.
Right?
I mean,
I'll let you have the floor.
Obviously, Neve Campbell in Scream. Courtney Cox and her bangs in Scream 3.
Yes.
Parker Posey in Scream 3. Let's do both Cillian Murphy and Rachel McAdams in Red Eye.
Wow.
Yeah, I think those are like the big ones that I for sure would nominate.
I would throw in Laurie Metcalf in Scream 2 as well.
That's a good one. I mean, even
though it's very small, but yeah.
Timothy Olyphant, Scream 2 as well. Charming.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Until he's not.
Right. Andrew Carden said, Music of the Heart was initially poised to be a Madonna vehicle. Would her version have been better, and any chance she could have landed a nomination?
I cannot picture Madonna in this.
I really, really don't think it would have happened for her. Would have loved to have seen what that looked like. Think it would be very different. I understand why maybe there were creative differences. Adam said, Madonna and Meryl being considered for the same role again after Evita. Which Madonna role would Meryl turn into another Oscar nomination? I don't know. Well, Meryl has the magic touch, as we know. She can make anything into a nomination. But I think, just to reiterate Evita, I think, without a doubt, if Meryl is playing Eva Perón, she's getting that nomination.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
Fritz said, rank Meryl's nominations of the 90s. So there were 4, as a recap. We had Postcards from the Edge. We had The Bridges of Madison County. We had One True Thing. And Music of the Heart. So I don't know if you've seen all 4 of those, but I can give you my ranking here.
I would love your ranking.
Yes. Number 1, with a bullet, The Bridges of Madison County. Her best nomination, period. Number 2, Postcards from the Edge, really fun. Number 3, One True Thing. And number 4, Music of the Heart, respectfully.
That feels right.
Yeah. Fritz said, is Music of the Heart the biggest they nominate Meryl for anything so far? I mean, I kind of think so, all due respect. If anyone else is in the role, they're not getting nominated. So
Yeah.
if it's really just like Meryl's in a movie this year, let's check it out. And then that's kind of what this felt like.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like Florence Foster Jenkins is a little bit more egregious than this. And I
That's true.
also feel like the Iron Lady, she completely misunderstands who Margaret Thatcher is, which is a monster. And so I also feel like it's a bad nomination and a very bad win.
Fair enough. Yeah. I think the question was so far, technically. So,
Yes.
But yes. So far, I would say yes. But more down the line, I will agree that there are more egregious. Yeah. Zoe G said, am I the only one who knows what Music of the Heart is because NSYNC did a song for it and got an Oscar nom for it?
Yeah, you might, because I didn't know that. Maybe it's because I'm a Backstreet Boys fan.
Wow.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, people do kind of know that song. I don't know. I think it was big in 1999. It's a Diane Warren song, of course.
Diane Warren with a pop song?
Yeah.
Never heard of her do that.
Imagine that. Grace Kogan said, if you could put Meryl Streep in one of this year's Best Picture nominees, as in 2024, which one would you choose?
Do I do absolutely chaotic or what I
Yes.
think? Okay, absolutely chaotic. Let's put her in Poor Things.
Oh, God. What is she going to do there?
Go insane, probably.
That's true.
Yeah. I mean, it's that, or you put her in Anatomy of a Fall.
Yeah. Well, I kind of interpreted this a little differently.
Oh.
I sort of thought, like, are we just, like, putting Meryl Streep, like, in a different role in one of these films? Or I didn't know if this was, like, recasting her as, like, the lead of one of them. I wasn't sure. Either way, I said Barbie because I felt like
that's safer.
It made the most sense for her to just show up possibly as herself. Or she could have been the narrator, you know?
Safer choices.
Yeah, maybe. But I'd like to see her in Anatomy of a Fall, Poor Things, any of these. Oppenheimer, why not?
Yeah.
Okay, Matthew Rodriguez said, 1999 is always heralded as such a watershed year for movies, and for some reason this category feels so disconnected from that. Why do you think that is?
Because they weren't brave enough to nominate Kirsten Dunst for Drop Dead Gorgeous.
Wow. You were ready with that response. But you're right, and you should say it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just this category, though. I think it's a lot of categories this year. Because, like, I don't know about you. I don't know if you've seen the Cider House Rules, but I feel like that's one that is taking up a lot of space that could have been used for much more adventurous nominees. I don't know. I think for Best Actress, though, there might have been a feeling of it feeling adventurous to them. Like, they had Boys Don't Cry, they had Tumbleweeds, these smaller films that sort of filled that type of slot.
Yeah.
MJ said, which of the nominations feels the most of its time, and which snubbed performance feels likeliest to have been nominated in 2024? Well, I think it's Meryl in Music of the Heart that feels like the most of its time, personally.
Yeah, feel good Lifetime movie.
Right. And then which snub feels the likeliest to be nominated now? Maybe Reese Witherspoon for Election? Possibly.
Yeah.
I would like to think that times have changed enough that we can embrace a performance like that.
Yeah. I think probably Reese would be the most reasonable to fill that slot.
Speaking of which, Juan Carlos Ojano said, who else came close? I look at how this is considered one of the best years in cinema, but I saw how this Best Actress 5 just transferred 5 for 5 from the Globes to SAG to Oscars, which feels like everyone just narrowed it down to those 5. Yeah, I sort of understand the sentiment there. Who else came close? Again, Reese. She got Golden Globe nominated at least. Sigourney Weaver was nominated at the Golden Globes for A Map of the World. I saw some predictions for like Frances O'Connor for Mansfield Park, which I haven't seen, but those were kind of considered the main dark horses.
Yeah.
Cody Derricks said Heather Donahue won Worst Actress at the Razzies for The Blair Witch Project, a performance that should have been up for the Oscar. Are there any other Razzie-winning performances throughout their sordid history that should have been Oscar contenders instead?
I think an obvious one is Elizabeth Berkley in Showgirls.
Correct. Absolutely. Yes.
Like,
yes. Underline. Yes.
yeah. I mean, like, if we can have Emma Stone win for whatever that performance was this year, no shade. I'm just saying, if we have a film like Barbie that gives the female experience, maybe we should take note on how that's framed and approached. I feel like Elizabeth Berkley in Showgirls is really incredible and giving her all.
I love that. Absolutely agreed. I would also, of course, throw in Faye Dunaway in Mommy Dearest. They just didn't understand it.
Yeah. Melissa McCarthy in Life of the Party. That's another one.
Sure.
Or comedies.
Yeah. I'm going to also say, I don't know how you feel about this film necessarily, but Jennifer Lawrence in Mother.
Yes.
She didn't win a Razzie, but she was nominated. That is one of her best performances. So that's
a wonderful pick. I co-sign that.
Thank you. Yes. Razzies, get some taste.
Or just don't exist.
Or just cease to exist. Either is fine. Okay, both Alicio and Christopher Perkins want us to talk about Halle Berry, who won an Emmy for introducing Dorothy Dandridge in 1999, and is asking, like, if this were released theatrically, would she have been nominated for an Oscar? And who would she have replaced? Well, it is always tough for Black actresses to even be nominated for Best Actress, unfortunately. As we know, there haven't been very many up to this point in Oscar history, but she is playing a real person. She is actually literally playing an Oscar nominee, Dorothy Dandridge. So, yeah, I think she could get in. I think maybe she replaces, I don't even want to say Meryl, I think she replaces Julianne Moore.
Probably. Yeah, because they love a biopic. So Music of the Heart, yes, I think, would trump the period piece.
Yep, I agree. Okay, Gordon has wanting a lengthy response, I should say, to this question, but I will try to condense it as much as possible for the sake of time. Every year of the 1990s, there's at least one nominee in this category who was the only nomination her film got. How would you rank these 16 lone actress nominees of the decade? Okay, so the choices there were Kathy Bates in Misery, Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman, Joanne Woodward in Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, Bette Midler in For the Boys, Michelle Pfeiffer in Love Field, Stockard Channing in 6 Degrees of Separation, Jessica Lange in Blue Sky, Jodie Foster in Nell, Susan Sarandon in The Client, Sharon Stone in Casino, Meryl Streep in The Bridges of Madison County, Diane Keaton in Marvin's Room, Emily Watson in Breaking the Waves, Julie Christie in Afterglow, Meryl Streep in One True Thing, and Janet McTeer in Tumbleweeds. So I'm not going to rank all 16 there since that'll take too long. I just narrowed it down to my top 5 of that group. Emily Watson in Breaking the Waves, for sure. Meryl Streep in Bridges of Madison County. Kathy Bates in Misery. Stockard Channing in 6 Degrees of Separation. And for my fun pick, Julia Roberts in Pretty Woman.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I
didn't know if you...
I was just going to say, I would maybe switch one of those out with like Janet McTeer, who, yeah. I don't know, but I really love Janet McTeer and her nomination.
David Krasner said, I'd love to hear you cast the supporting actress nominees from 99 in each of these leading roles. Oh boy. Okay, well, I'll give you mine and you tell me what you think of this.
Great.
Chloe Sevigny in Boys Don't Cry, since she was actually in the discussion to actually play Brandon. So, you know. I'll say Angelina Jolie in none of these really, but if I had to make a choice, Music of the Heart when she's a little older. I don't think it would work very well, but I don't really see her in the other 3 necessarily. I'm going to say Toni Collette absolutely in Tumbleweeds.
Yeah.
Catherine Keener, I would put in maybe American Beauty? ? And then Samantha Morton in The End of the Affair, who is British.
Yeah.
So that helps.
It does. Yeah, I think that would be my exact ranking.
Yeah. don't love the Angelina in Music of the Heart, but I also don't want anyone in Music of the Heart of that group.
No,
So
no. I mean, like maybe
tough
it might
choice.
be fun to switch Toni Collette and Catherine Keener. Toni
Yeah,
Collette in
I
American
thought about that
Beauty.
too.
But I mean, especially at the time, she was not old
Right,
enough to play that role.
right.
But yeah.
Yeah. MJ said, speaking of which, where would you rank Toni Collette's performance in Sixth Sense among this group of lead actress nominees if she had been placed into lead as a sixth nominee?
I mean, I probably would have had her as my runner-up.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
I really like the performance. The film doesn't hold up from the first time I watched it at 8, but
Sure.
I think her performance is extremely memorable, and she's one of the
Yeah.
greatest. So
I was gonna say fourth, which now feels mean
that's okay.
because I just really like Hilary and Annette and Janet so much that Toni it's the sheer fact of her being in a supporting role that she doesn't quite have as much to do outside of the car scene. Although it is a great performance overall, and just the way it builds up to that, I think, is key. But Hi Girls, Hi Louise said, considering Miramax also had Holy Smoke, did they drop the ball here, pushing for what's considered a negligible notch for Streep instead? Did Kate Winslet even land in the top 10? I don't think so. I think Holy Smoke was a little too out there for the Academy to really touch it. They've been very hit and miss with Jane Campion movies overall, and that's maybe one of her weirder ones. So I don't think she came close.
Yeah. And when you have Meryl learning the violin, like that just seems like a really safe bet to invest in.
Exactly. Let's see. Oh, Declan Cashin said 1999 is famously known as one of the greatest years in movie history, but the Oscar noms for the year famously didn't reflect that. We've seen this sentiment multiple questions. Name 5 contenders for this race that would better reflect 1999's reputation. Okay, so we're going to have some fun here. We're going to take out all the nominees that we have and put in 5 cool, fun nominees.
Obviously, the easiest task for me, because I've already started with the chaos that is Kirsten Dunst and Drop Dead Gorgeous.
Yes.
I think another film that she's in, but would not nominate the performance, would nominate her co-star Michelle Williams in Dick.
Oh, very good.
Because I feel like you have to be a great actor to pretend that you love Richard Nixon.
Fair.
Truly.
Yeah.
I think Reese Witherspoon is a great choice for Election. I'm trying to remember all of the other films in 1999. What are some of your picks as I ruminate on my last 2?
Okay. Well, I have my very fun lineup that I've created for myself here, which is Reese Witherspoon in Election, Cecilia Roth in All About My Mother, who is fantastic and would be a great international pick. Julia Roberts in Notting Hill. I don't care what people say. I think that is a fantastic performance from her. Nicole Kidman in Eyes Wide Shut. And honestly, just for the chaos of it, I am throwing in Heather Donahue for the Blair Witch Project.
Good.
And I think if we have a lineup like that, that is fully reflective of 1999. And people are like, hell yeah, what a great lineup.
Yeah, I think I second that Heather Donahue nomination. And then I think for further chaos, I would add Natasha Lyonne in But I'm a Cheerleader. Because
I forgot. Yes.
Look, I love Natasha Lyonne. If there's a year that has a lot of really strong independent films, it's 1999, and let's just nominate them all.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. All right, Scotty Pendragon, kind of similar. If you were going to replace all 5 actresses up for that year, who would you nominate in their place? We already said that, but then they say, who would your winner be? Who would your winner be of the group that you assembled?
That is a really difficult task. I would say Kirsten Dunst and Drop Dead Gorgeous. Kiki deserves a win for that.
Yeah. I can't believe she only has 1 nomination.
Criminal.
To date. And it's in supporting. She's a leading lady. Come on. Yeah, I think of the ones I picked, I might go Reese Witherspoon.
That's a good one,
I
too.
think that is iconic work. Or Cecilia Roth. I don't know. That's really hard. Greg Creming and C.N. Kelly both want to know how close we think Reese Witherspoon was to securing her first nomination. I think she was reasonably 6th or 7th would be my guess.
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
I think
she won some stuff. She was nominated stuff. Election was nominated in adapted screenplay, so they watched it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure her age and just kind of where she was in her career hindered her a bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think she was closer to a nomination than being down on the list of potential nominees.
Yep. Lila said, why do you think Kirsten Dunst didn't get a lot of attention for The Virgin Suicides? And which actresses from Sofia Coppola movies would you say were absolutely snubbed at the Oscars through the years? Well, she wasn't eligible this year because Virgin Suicides did come out at Cannes in 99, but it didn't come out theatrically in the US until 2000. So that's the caveat of why she's not here and why she wouldn't be eligible to be here.
Yes, that's the long and short of it. But yeah, I certainly would have nominated her for The Virgin Suicides and probably also Marie Antoinette, which would have been very controversial at the time. Was sad to not see Kaylee Spaney included this year for Priscilla. And I think maybe not Best Actress, but supporting, if we're gonna nominate a child actor, Elle Fanning in Somewhere, I think was a really great performance.
Yeah. She directs great female performances, and the Academy has not reflected that literally at all.
Ever.
But also Scarlett Johansson, obviously, for Lost in Translation, alongside Bill Murray. I think that movie doesn't work as well as it does without her, too. So, yeah. I don't know what it is with the Academy with Sofia Coppola, that they just have this weird, like, chilly relationship with her outside of Lost in Translation. I don't know.
Yeah, it's very interesting that her first very more male-dominated film, which obviously both Scarlett Johansson and Bill Murray are co-leads of the film, but to kind of go from The Virgin Suicides, which is very feminine, to Lost in Translation, which is a little bit more equal. It feels very weird that that's the only time that they feel she deserves recognition.
Yes, very good point there. Yeah, I'm sure it's not fully a coincidence. Andrew Carden said, why was Winona Ryder totally MIA that season for Girl Interrupted? Did she deserve a nomination? It has been a very long time since I've seen Girl Interrupted, quite frankly, so I don't fully remember the performance, but I do remember Angelina just totally, stealing the show to the extent that, like, it's just not as flashy of a performance that Winona is giving from my memory.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Academy really likes big performances. They really tend to punish quiet, nuanced performances, which again is kind of why I think having someone like Swank show up in Best Actress and then win is a rarity, because I think that there's a lot more quiet than like flashy, yelly, showy type performances. And so I think to have a grounding performance like Winona does in Girl Interrupted, that definitely is not the type of acting that the Academy feels is the caliber that they like to recognize and award.
Right. Fritz said, rank the winners of the decade. So this is my ranking as of now, subject to change, because I tend to change my mind on certain things. Yeah, here we go. Number 1, Jodie Foster in The Silence of the Lambs. Easily. Number 2, I would do Holly Hunter in The Piano. Number 3, Kathy Bates in Misery. Number 4, Frances McDormand in Fargo. Number 5, Hilary Swank in Boys Don't Cry, all of which I think are top tier. Number 6, Emma Thompson in Howard's End. Number 7, Susan Sarandon in Dead Man Walking. 8, Gwyneth Paltrow in Shakespeare in Love. 9, Helen Hunt in As Good as It Gets. And number 10, Jessica Lange in Blue Sky.
Yeah, I think your top 5 show that it feels like you could just rearrange them at any given moment.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Which I did many times in ranking them for this.
I'm sure. Because, again, you have 2 performances from kind of more horror, thriller genres.
Right.
That's hard to be able to parse which one somehow trumps the other.
Well, Chelsea, here goes Chelsea, which with her obligatory Survivor question, as she said, but for winners of this decade. So She is asking best social game, mental and physical beasts of challenges, who's finding idols and actually play them. And then the other question I will save for after we do that because it's very specific. So I don't know how much familiarity you have with Survivor. I'm sure Chelsea has downloaded you with information.
Yes, I've gotten the rundown. I have the answers. I am prepared.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, what do you think? Who's got the best social game? Who's winning the challenges? What's the dynamic?
So I think what we're doing here is kind of like the one who is able to play the game is Jodie Foster, brains of the operation.
Correct. Sounds right.
The mental and physical, like more physical, would probably be Kathy Bates. She broke a man's ankles.
Right.
She can do anything. And then probably the one who is like on her scavenger hunt, finding all of the idols, minding her own business, and coming back with her treasures, Frances McDormand.
Correct. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah. I think my last one, we do also have to have Emma Thompson there.
Yes, we do.
Who is
just in general
charming. She is there.
Yes.
She is the one who is giving the best talking heads. She's probably like Mike White walking around with wine, looking for an idol as well, but not being helpful because she's drinking wine.
That is right on the money.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hard to argue with that. Yeah, I think for who wins, I think Frances McDormand wins. I think she's got the great combination of being crafty and physical, but also sharp and just like, you know, if we're saying this is like as the characters, you know, a very easy charm and likability factor. So, but I do think Emma Thompson and Howard's Edge, she's putting up a fight. I think she's got a good social game. I do think Kathy Bates, just if she's Annie Wilkes, I think she gets manipulated at a certain point and is taken out swiftly, as she is at the end of the film.
Yeah. She's the one that you keep for a while because you need the physical game. And then when we're parsed down, she is the first that
it's like,
gets her comeuppance.
Yep. And she is definitely not happy to be voted out.
No.
And she votes bitterly at the end. Yeah, I think, like you said, Jodie Foster does very, very well. I could see Gwyneth doing well too, perhaps. Now we should get to the other question here, which is, which 4 actresses would you like to see manipulate a Best Actor winner into giving up his Oscar/immunity?
I think there are many, right? Because we have Jeffrey Rush and Al Pacino.
Well, yes.
But I think the obvious answer is that crazy Italian man, Roberto Benigni.
Yeah. He was mine. Yep, he's mine too. Because also, I believe he has Ian McKellen's Oscar. Thank you very much for Gods and Monsters.
Yes.
And who does he get manipulated by, though?
I mean, if we're talking about the actress herself, it's Frances McDormand. That woman is just like, this is mine now.
Charge.
Yeah. She just says, this is mine. Takes it. She waits for no man. I do think that Marge would also take it too, because she would just...
That's true.
Minnesotan charm it right out of him.
I agree. I think she could do it. I think Emma Thompson could do it. I think Kathy Bates, in her way, could do it. And Susan Sarandon.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's lots of great badass women who won Best Actress in the 90s who could easily manipulate a man.
Yes.
So, there you go. Great question, Chelsea. Few more just for me. Celluloid Siren said, rank the top 5 best performances of the 90s in this category. Meaning of the nominees that I've talked about. Okay, so my top 5 of the decade, I will do in 5 to 1 order. Number 5, Holly Hunter in The Piano. Number 4, Angela Bassett in What's Love Got to Do with It. Number 3, Meryl Streep in The Bridges of Madison County. Number 2, Jodie Foster in The Silence of the Lambs. And my number one of the decade is Emily Watson in Breaking the Waves, which is a haunting performance. So, do you have any particular of the 90s that have always stood out to you?
I mean, I do love Swank here.
Yeah.
That is always a good one. And
Yeah.
of course, I'm a big Gina Davis lady, so I really like that performance. And I think, again, being the last time that we recognize that there can be more than one lead in a film.
What a concept.
I know. The fact that she didn't get crowded out and got to have co-recognition with Susan Sarandon, I think is great, because it's my favorite of the two performances. I think that's where I land.
Yeah. Existential rock. This is another Susan Hayward related question. Which 90s Best Actress nominated performance was most likely filmed on location inside a woman's soul? Yes, the famous tagline of Susan Hayward's films. I'm just going to say the melodrama of the Susan Hayward thing is very Jessica Lange and Blue Sky coded. But I also think just the concept of like filmed on location inside a woman's soul could refer to like Holly Hunter in The Piano in a way. If we're not going to do the melodrama part of that and say like it truly was from her soul, or Emily Watson Breaking the Waves, that kind of internalized performance. Fritz said, if you can have one tie in this decade, what would it be? Ugh, there are many, I must say.
Mm-hmm.
This one would be nice to be a tie so that Annette Bening could have an Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
But my honest answer would be 1993, Holly Hunter and Angela Bassett both win.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. And then again, maybe 91 having Jodie and either Susan or Gina winning for...
Or all three of them.
Three-way tie.
Hell yeah. That's what needs to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And this is the last question here. And in many ways, it is a real wrap-up moment for me where Jimmy wants to know, having now covered the 20th century, which performances of every decade were the most pleasantly surprising and the most disappointing? One of each for every decade. Well, I did put in the work for this, so join me on this journey backwards in time.
I'm so excited.
Yes. So we'll go 90s to the 20s here, just for fun. Most surprising of the 90s for me was actually Emily Watson in Breaking the Waves, which I had never seen before this watch, and she just astonished me. So that's got to be it for me. Most disappointing would be, I think there are worse performances than this, but Catherine Deneuve in Indochine, just because I wanted so much more for her one and only Oscar nomination, this iconic, French actress. I wanted more. 80s, most surprising was I thought that Sally Kirkland in Anna was much better than I ever expected. So you go, Sally Kirkland. Most disappointing would be just how dull the 1984 lineup was with all the Save the Farm ladies. So just a tie there. 70s, I would say most surprising was just how kind of incredible the 1974 lineup was. Even the ones that I rank lower, like Valerie Perrine and Lenny, it's just like she would be my winner in another year. Most disappointing would be Maggie Smith in Travels with My Aunt. Not good. Sorry to Maggie. She's delivered many great performances. That is not one of them. Okay. 60s, I'm going to say Katharine Hepburn in Long Day's Journey into Night was such a surprise that I was not prepared for. So that was really cool. Most disappointing, unfortunately for me, was Geraldine Page in Summer and Smoke. Just did not do it for me. We've talked about characters who can be kind of annoying in another actor's hands if they're not played right, and that is an example of that being the case. So 50s, I would say most pleasantly surprising is Eleanor Parker proving why she deserved to be among the greats in that 1950 lineup with people like Judy Holliday and, Bette Davis and Gloria Swanson. her performance in Caged, I think, totally holds up and is worthy of being among that group. Most disappointing was getting off to a rough start with Elizabeth Taylor for Raintree County, which is a film that is not very good. For the 40s, I will say, so Gaslight wasn't a new watch for me, but sometimes when people are always like, Barbara Stanwyck was robbed for Double Indemnity, I'm like, well, Ingrid Bergman is no slouch there too, so that's what I would say for that one. And then I'm going to just combine the 20s and the 30s because there's only 2 years of the 20s anyway. Theodora Goes Wild became an obsession for me, and I loved Irene Dunne so much, and I highly recommend that to anyone who loves a screwball comedy. Most disappointing would be that I just don't think that Mary Pickford held up at all for her performance in Coquette. You could really see her struggling with that one. So that's it. That's my backwards journey through the Oscars of the 20th century.
Can I
Any notes, thoughts, concerns?
Well, can I ask you a question and put you on the spot?
A live question. Wow. Never happened before.
Of the 20th century, which is your favorite decade of Best Actress nominees?
Oh boy. Wow. That is a great question that I haven't really considered. But
just go with your gut.
It's kind of a boring answer because people always say this just in general for film, but the 70s, I think, had so many high highs. Joe Clayburgh, our favorite among them. Jenna Rollins in A Woman Under the Influence. Ingrid Bergman in Autumn Sonata. There's just so many incredible, incredible performances that still hold up 50 years later.
Yeah.
So, yeah, probably that.
I love that. And I also think I agree. I mean,
yeah,
Ellen Burstyn, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Incredible performance.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Well, let's get to our final segment here where we will reveal who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. This is probably obvious, but Morgan, who was the runner-up?
I think Annette Bening is obviously the runner-up here. I think it was a really close race. And yeah, I think you're right. Only probably a handful of votes really separated her and Hilary Swank.
Yeah, that is probably what makes it even more heartbreaking, is just knowing how close that Annette Bening was to an Oscar at any point in her career. It could have been for anything, and I would have been heartbroken for her that she didn't get it.
Yeah.
And I'm still holding out hope for her. And yeah, ultimately, of the others, Julianne Moore and Meryl Streep were just happy to be there, truly. Janet McTeer certainly probably got a handful of, critic adjacent support, voters who were along the same lines and taste of the critics. But then when you have Hilary Swank and Boys Don't Cry, overshadowing that Janet McTeer never really had a chance, I don't think. But yeah, Annette Bening, I could definitely see a lot of people just wanting to vote for her because they just liked her overall as well, not just about the performance. They just loved her. She made a lot of friends, and she's wife of Warren Beatty, very social, and she's delivering a very, very committed performance in that. So I imagine she did get a fair amount of votes, even from people who did see Boys Don't Cry, and maybe some older voters who weren't really taken with that particular style and the storytelling would have preferred Annette Bening. So, yeah. Okay, well, final question for you, Morgan. Who would you have voted for from this lineup?
I think this is really tough. While I really loved Janet McTeer, I really do think that Hilary Swank would have gotten my vote. It's a performance that sticks with you. It's a film that sticks with you. And yeah, I think it's really hard to... I even purposely watched this film last so that it wouldn't cloud the other films. And it still ended up being the one that I think just sticks out the most.
I have to say, I pretty much had a similar experience in the sense that when I watched American Beauty, I was like, Annette Bening is so funny. She's just really going for it. Even if some of the other choices in the film I don't love, she's just so on top of her game. And then I watched Boys Don't Cry, and it was like, oh, actually... it's got to be Hilary. I just think it's such an undeniable performance. I just think what she does is truly honor Brandon's story and make him beyond a victim and just totally, transcend anything that was even asked of her, and really just created a true life there. And so, yeah, Hilary would get my vote. Sorry, Annette. I feel really bad about it, but we shall see what future lineups have in store for Annette and me going forward. But yeah, Hilary definitely gets my vote. This is the first time I've actually agreed with the Academy since 1992.
Wow.
So we're back. We are so back to agreeing, Academy. Keep it up. So yeah, thank you, Morgan, so much. This was such a fun journey to end this whole century. It's astonishing to me. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for letting me join you on this ride. It was a really fun and weird watch.
Yes, it sure was. Well, tell people where they could find more of you on the internet and your fabulous new podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, you can follow my podcast on Instagram, Female Gaze, the Film Club. And then probably the best place to find me now is on Letterboxd, MSML Roberts. You can see all of my wonderful, usually one sentence reviews of the many films I'm watching.
That's all you need.
Yeah.
That one sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yes, thank you all so much for listening. You could find me on all platforms at Kevin_Jacobson, shows at Oscar Runner Up on Twitter, Instagram at And the Runner Up Is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup_is, where you can hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes. And that's it for the season. That's it for the 20th century. We are now entering the millennium. So excited to see how things change from there. I could announce here we'll be coming back with the season premiere of the 2000 season on June 5th. So looking forward to that. And just to give people a head start, we will be breaking down the Best Actress lineup of 2000, where the nominees were Joan Allen in The Contender, Juliette Binoche in Chocolat, Ellen Burstyn in Requiem for a Dream, Laura Linney in You Can Count on Me, and Julia Roberts in Erin Brockovich, with the winner being Julia Roberts. So with that, thank you again, Morgan, and I will bid you all adieu.